There is a town in America that does not appear on any map, a town where the fish have 3 eyes, where the richest man alive has been alive for well over a century, where a baby once shot a billionaire and walked away without facing a single consequence, and where 36 years have passed without a single person aging a single day. That town is Springfield, and tonight we are going there. Settle in, get comfortable, turn the lights down low if you want, because for the next several hours, we are going to move through the darkest corners of The Simpsons, slowly and carefully, the way you would move through a house you suspect is haunted. Not running, not rushing, just looking, paying attention, letting things sink in. Every theory in this video is drawn from the show itself. The evidence is in the episodes. It has always been in the episodes. And by the time we reach the end, you may find that the cartoon you grew up watching was never quite the simple, cheerful thing you thought it was. We start with the theory that explains everything. Section 1. The nuclear power plant is poisoning Springfield. And everyone knows there is a building that sits at the edge of Springfield like a bad tooth that nobody wants to pull. 2 cooling towers, cracked at the base, steam rising off them at all hours. A river nearby that runs in colors that rivers are not supposed to run in. And inside, somewhere in the maze of corridors and warning signs that nobody heeds, a man named Homer Simpson is sleeping at his desk with a half-eaten donut balanced on his chest. This is the Springfield nuclear power plant. It is, by any reasonable standard, one of the most dangerous places in the history of fiction. And the theory that surrounds it is not subtle. It is not a theory that requires you to squint or read between the lines. It is, in fact, sitting directly in front of you in nearly every episode that has ever aired, waiting patiently for someone to take it seriously. The theory is this. The Springfield nuclear power plant has been slowly, continuously, and catastrophically contaminating the town of Springfield for decades. The radiation does not stay inside the plant. It leaks into the water supply. It seeps into the air. It saturates the soil. And the people of Springfield, every single resident, every man and woman and child who has been drinking that water and breathing that air and living in that town have been mutated by it, not slightly. Not metaphorically, fundamentally, at a cellular level, in ways the show has been showing you from the very beginning. Let us take this slowly, because the evidence deserves to be laid out carefully. The plant itself was, at the time of its most memorable inspection, found to be in violation of 342 separate safety regulations. 342. When the inspectors calculated what it would cost to bring the facility up to code, the estimate came in at $56 million. The plant's owner, Charles Montgomery Burns, a man worth many times that figure, refused to pay it. Not because the money was beyond his reach, because paying it would mean acknowledging that the violations existed. And acknowledging the violations would mean someone might start asking what those violations had already done to the community living in the shadow of those cracked cooling towers. The violations themselves are not minor administrative paperwork issues. Radioactive waste has been dumped directly into bodies of water near the plant. Radioactive waste has been left on the grounds of children's playgrounds. A piece of plutonium was used as a paperweight on someone's desk. The cooling towers, the massive structures whose entire purpose is to prevent the reactor from overheating and releasing radiation into the surrounding environment, were patched after cracking with a piece of chewing gum. Inside the lower levels of the facility, there are rats. They glow. They are luminescent, not because someone painted them, but because they have absorbed enough radiation from their environment that their bodies emit visible light in the dark. And there are human skeletons in the basement. The show mentions this once, casually, during the inspection. Human skeletons in the basement of a working nuclear facility. Nobody asks who they are. Nobody asks how they got there. Nobody investigates. The inspector notes the violation and moves on. And the show moves on with him, and the audience is left sitting with the image of bones in the dark beneath a leaking reactor, wondering if maybe they should be more disturbed by this than the show seems to want them to be. The man responsible for preventing all of this from happening, the person whose literal job description includes the phrase nuclear safety technician, whose purpose is to ensure that none of this contamination reaches the population of Springfield, is Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson, whose IQ has been stated by the show's own creator to be 55. Homer Simpson, who once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to see what would happen. Homer Simpson, who regularly falls asleep at his workstation, who eats during emergency meltdown warnings, who has on multiple occasions been depicted doing something so profoundly irresponsible inside an active nuclear facility that the premise alone that this man has this job, that he has held this job for over 3 decades, should terrify anyone who stops to think about it for more than a moment. There is a canonical detail about Homer's brain that the show reveals in a season 12 episode, and it is one of the most quietly alarming things the series has ever put on screen. Homer, for his entire life, has had a crayon lodged in his brain. It got there during childhood, in a way the show depicts with its characteristic combination of absurdity and genuine sadness, and it stayed there, undetected, for decades. When the crayon is finally removed, something remarkable happens. Homer becomes intelligent, not slightly smarter, dramatically recognizably intelligent. He can follow complex arguments. He can understand situations that had previously been invisible to him. He can see the world around him with a clarity he has never had before. His IQ, which had been sitting at 55, climbs dramatically when the obstruction is gone. And then he has the crayon put back. He chooses to return to the fog. He chooses diminished capacity over the clarity that made his life in Springfield unbearable. Because when Homer could think clearly, he could see what Springfield actually was. He could see his job for what it actually was. And the truth of it was too heavy to carry. But here's the question the show never asks about the crayon. How did it get there in the first place? A child has a foreign object lodged in his brain, deeply enough to affect his cognitive function for his entire life. And not one doctor in Springfield ever finds it during a checkup, a scan, or a routine examination. Either every medical professional in Springfield is operating below any standard of competence that would justify their licensure, or someone knew the crayon was there and chose not to remove it. We will return to that thought later, because it connects to something much larger. For now, let us talk about the fish. In the second season of The Simpsons, a fish is pulled from a river near the nuclear power plant. This fish has 3 eyes. It is not a special fish. It is not a rare mutation from a distant species. It is an ordinary fish from an ordinary river that runs along an ordinary stretch of Springfield shoreline, except that somewhere between the water and the growth of this particular animal, something went wrong. Or something went very, very right, depending on your perspective. If your perspective is that of a scientist trying to understand what the power plant is doing to the local ecosystem, the fish becomes a news story within the show. A gubernatorial candidate uses it as evidence that Burns is poisoning the environment. Burns is forced to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate that it is harmless. He eats it. The town watches. Someone makes a joke. And then the story ends and nobody does anything, and the river keeps running past the plant, and nobody asks the most obvious question that this moment raises. If the fish have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people drinking the water? The answer to that question has been unfolding across every season of the show. It is written on the bodies of every character who lives in Springfield. But nobody in Springfield is reading it. Look at the residents. Homer Simpson has a skull shape that does not conform to standard human anatomy. His eyes bulge in a way that suggests either significant pressure behind them or something has altered the orbital structure of his face. He has an overbite. He has 4 fingers on each hand. His healing capability is extraordinary to the point of impossibility. He has been shot. He has been electrocuted. He has fallen off cliffs. He has been struck by vehicles. He has survived explosions that would not leave detectable fragments of a normal human being. He does not just survive these events, he recovers from them, quickly, without lasting damage, without the kind of scarring or permanent injury that these traumas would leave on anyone whose body was operating according to normal biological rules. And he has spent the entirety of his adult working life inside a nuclear facility, in direct proximity to an active reactor. Marge Simpson has the same bulging eyes. She has the same 4-fingered hands. Her hair grows straight up, in a single rigid tower, in exactly the same shape it has been in for 36 years, without the use of any product, against every law of physics and gravity that governs the behavior of human hair. She was briefly employed at the plant herself, which means she has had direct exposure to the facility's interior, in addition to the ambient contamination she has been absorbing as a Springfield resident since before her children were born. Bart, Lisa, and Maggie were all born in Springfield. All 3 of them were conceived after both parents had been living in the town and, in Homer's case, working inside the plant for years. All 3 of them display the same physical characteristics as every other Springfield resident: the spiky hair, the overbite, the eyes, The skin, the yellow skin. Every person who lives in Springfield has yellow skin. This is one of those details that tends to get filed away under "that's just the art style" and dismissed without further thought. But the show does something interesting when it introduces guest characters, celebrities, outsiders, people who are visiting Springfield from somewhere else. Those characters look different. Their proportions are different. Their features are different. Their eyes are shaped more like eyes. Their skin tones are more varied. Their overall physical presentation is closer to what you would describe as normal human anatomy. The show draws outsiders to look like outsiders, and Springfield residents to look like Springfield residents. And the difference is visible and consistent. Within the logic of the show's own universe, there is an observable physical difference between people who live inside Springfield and people who do not. The people inside look one way. The people outside look another way. And the thing that separates the inside from the outside is not the city limit sign. It is the power plant. It is decades of radiation leaking into the water, the air, and the soil of a closed community where almost nobody ever leaves. Even the animals are affected. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes and altered proportions as his human family. He does not look like a greyhound. He looks like a Springfield greyhound, which is a different thing entirely. And Blinky the fish did not develop a third eye because of a genetic anomaly. Blinky developed a third eye because the river he lives in is downstream from a reactor that has been hemorrhaging contamination for decades. The show tells you this directly. It shows you a mutated fish and says, with the voice of a gubernatorial campaign, that this is what the radiation is doing to the living organisms of Springfield. And then it expects you to believe that the exact same radiation has had no effect on the human population drinking from the same water source. Burns knows. The show makes this explicit across multiple episodes. Burns undergoes weekly medical treatments of a kind that are not described in any conventional pharmaceutical literature. The treatments are intensive enough to cause his body to emit a visible green glow. They keep him alive for exactly 7 more days, at which point he requires another dose or he will die. His doctors describe his medical condition in terms that suggest he is not surviving through any normal biological process. He is, instead, being maintained, kept in a state of artificial equilibrium by a regimen that only someone with his resources could access or afford. Burns manages radiation. He has been managing radiation in his own body for longer than most of the show's characters have been alive. He understands better than anyone in Springfield what radiation does to biological systems. He understands it not as an abstraction, not as a danger to be publicly acknowledged and managed, but as a personal reality. His own body is the experiment. His own continued existence is the proof of concept. And he has watched what his plant does to Springfield for decades, and he has said nothing, and he has done nothing, because Springfield is not his community. Springfield is his laboratory, and a laboratory does not require the informed consent of its subjects. The crayon story becomes even darker when you hold it next to this. If Springfield's medical establishment is operating under Burns's influence, and the show establishes repeatedly that Burns's influence extends into nearly every institution in the town, then Homer's crayon was not simply missed by careless doctors. It was left in place. A cognitively impaired safety inspector is not an oversight. He is a feature. A man who cannot understand what is happening around him cannot ask questions about it. He cannot organize against it. He cannot threaten the arrangement that keeps the plant running and the violations unaddressed and the contamination ongoing. Homer's incompetence ensures the plant stays dangerous. The plant staying dangerous ensures the radiation keeps leaking. The radiation keeps leaking and the population stays damaged and the population stays damaged, and they keep going to work at the plant and drinking the water and raising their yellow 4-fingered children in houses that run on electricity generated by the thing that is slowly changing them. It is a closed system, a perfect loop, and Burns built every part of it. When German investors briefly purchased the plant, they fired Homer immediately. Within days of taking ownership, the first thing they did was evaluate what it would cost to bring the facility to code. The estimate nearly bankrupted them. They sold the plant back to Burns, and Burns bought it back and rehired Homer the same week, because the Germans understood something that Homer could never understand about himself. Homer is not a safety inspector. Homer is the mechanism by which safety is prevented. He is the structural guarantee that nothing will ever be fixed, nothing will ever be reported, nothing will ever change. The radiation theory does not solve one mystery about The Simpsons. It solves all of them. why the characters do not age, why the town resets after catastrophic events, why Homer survives things that should kill him, why Burns has been alive for over a century, why nobody asks questions they should obviously be asking. The answer to every one of those mysteries is the same thing, and it is leaking out of the same two cracked cooling towers that have been there since the very first episode. Springfield is not a quirky animated town. It is a contamination zone. The residents are not eccentric, they are symptomatic, and the nuclear power plant that dominates their skyline is not a background detail. It is the engine of everything. It has always been the engine of everything. Every yellow face, every bulging eye, every impossible recovery, every forgotten catastrophe, every inexplicable reset, all of it traces back to the same source, quietly leaking the same invisible poison into the same water supply, feeding the same compromised minds that cannot work out why their fish have 3 eyes and their children have 4 fingers on each hand. The plant is the show. And nobody in Springfield will ever figure that out, because the plant already made sure they cannot. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what time it is. There is something worth knowing about the places this reaches, and if you have not subscribed yet, now is a good moment. Number Section 2. Homer's coma, everything since 1993 may be a dream. On the 1st of April 1993, something happened in Springfield that the show has never fully reckoned with. Something that, depending on how seriously you take the evidence, may mean that every episode of The Simpsons you have watched since that date, every adventure, every celebrity appearance, every impossible survival, every warm ending was generated inside the mind of a man lying unconscious in a hospital bed. Let us go back to that day slowly, because the setup matters. The 18th episode of Season 4 was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was simple. Bart plays a series of April Fool's pranks on Homer, each one escalating in scale. The final prank involves taking one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and placing it inside an industrial paint shaker. The shaker agitates the can to the point of structural failure. When Homer opens it later, the resulting explosion is violent enough to send him to the hospital. This is where things get quiet and strange. Homer is lying in his hospital bed, recovering from the explosion. He looks across the room. There is a vending machine. He wants a candy bar. He gets up. He reaches for the machine. The machine is unstable. It tips. It falls on top of him. And Homer Simpson flatlines. Not in a dream sequence. Not in a Treehouse of Horror episode. In a canonical, regular season episode of The Simpsons, Homer Simpson enters a state of clinical unconsciousness that the show calls a coma and depicts as lasting 7 weeks. The episode ends with Homer appearing to wake up. Bart, crying at his father's bedside, confesses that the pranks were his fault. Homer springs awake and immediately starts strangling his son. The family laughs. Everything goes back to normal. The credits roll. But before they roll, the show tells you something. In the final moments of the episode, the doctor informs Homer and his family that the coma has permanently destroyed 5% of Homer's brain function. Gone forever, unrecoverable. And Homer's response to learning that his brain has been irreparably damaged is to laugh. He says he does not understand why he is laughing. His family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. The episode ends. And then The Simpsons continued. For 32 more years. The theory that grew out of this episode is called the Homer coma theory, and it is the most debated, most internally consistent, and most emotionally devastating fan theory in the history of the show. The basic premise is this. Homer did not wake up. What the episode showed you was not a recovery. It was Homer's damaged brain generating the fantasy of waking up, because the alternative actually remaining conscious, actually staying in that hospital room, actually confronting what was happening to his body was more than his mind could sustain. Every single episode that has aired since the 1st of April, 1993, every storyline, every character arc, every guest appearance, every impossible event, every warm ending is a dream. It is the dream of a man lying in a bed in Springfield General Hospital, slowly losing brain function, while his family sits beside him and waits for him to open his eyes for real. The evidence for this interpretation is genuinely unsettling once you start looking for it. The most important piece of evidence is the tonal shift. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a different kind of show. Not different in animation style or format, different in what it was willing to believe about its characters. The storylines of the first 4 seasons were, relative to what came later, grounded. They dealt with recognizable problems in recognizable ways. Homer tries to stop drinking. He struggles with it. He fails. He tries again. Marge confronts the possibility that she might be attracted to someone other than her husband, and she handles it with the kind of quiet dignity and genuine internal conflict that real people experience. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher and has to manage the embarrassment of unrequited feelings. Bart faces the possibility of being held back a year at school, which is a real fear that real children have, and the show treats it with real emotional weight. These are human stories. They are funny. Absolutely. They are satirical. They are often absurd. But they are rooted in the kind of experiences that real families have, and the emotional truth underneath the jokes is recognizable. After the coma episode, something shifts. The shift is not immediate and it is not total. It happens gradually, over the course of subsequent seasons, like a tide coming in. Homer goes to space. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society. Homer meets God more than once. Homer discovers that his mother, whom he believed was dead, is actually alive and has been in hiding because she was a radical activist who destroyed a billionaire's bioweapons laboratory. Homer befriends dozens of celebrities. He travels to dozens of countries. He holds hundreds of different jobs. He survives forms of physical trauma that would not just kill a normal human being, once they would kill a platoon of trained soldiers several times over. The show goes from a family sitcom grounded in economic anxiety and domestic tension to a show where the laws of narrative reality have simply been suspended. And the audience noticed. The internet has spent 20 years arguing about when The Simpsons got bad, and the debate keeps returning to somewhere around season 5, season 6, somewhere in the mid-90s, somewhere just after the coma episode. The coma theory argues that the show did not get bad. Homer's brain got worse. And the further his brain deteriorates, the less bound his dreams are to the logic of the world he last consciously experienced. There is a detail from 6 months before the coma that, once you know the theory, you cannot hear the same way again. In the season 4 premiere, the episode that aired at the beginning of the same season that would end with the coma, Homer has a conversation with God. A real, face-to-face conversation. God appears to Homer, and the two of them talk. And at one point God tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life, but not yet. God says in this conversation that Homer's time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline is precise. The season begins with God telling Homer that his time is nearly up, and it ends with Homer's conscious life ending. If you take the coma theory seriously, the season premiere reads not as a quirky theological joke, but as a prophecy. God was telling Homer that the life he was living, the waking life, the one in Springfield with Marge and the kids and the job and the couch, was almost finished. And 6 months later it was. Everything since has been the dream of a dying man desperately holding on to the family he loves. This also explains the single biggest mystery in the show's entire run, the one that every theory has to account for, the one that nobody has ever been able to fully explain with cartoon logic or production convenience alone. Nobody ages. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old since 1989. He was 10 years old when the Berlin Wall came down, when the internet was invented, when the Twin Towers fell, when smartphones became part of everyday life. He has been 10 years old through every one of those moments. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge are still the same age they were when the show began, carrying the same faces, the same postures, the same relationship dynamics. The radiation theory offers one explanation. The coma theory offers a different one, and it is more elegant. Nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of a man who went unconscious in 1993 and never truly woke up. Of course, Homer's children do not age. His unconscious brain cannot imagine them growing up because he was not there to see it happen. His wife does not develop wrinkles because the last time he saw her face with full conscious clarity, she looked exactly like that. His friends do not change because his memory of them is locked at the moment the vending machine fell. Homer's coma dream does not just preserve his world. It preserves it at the exact moment he lost it, because that is the only reference material his sleeping brain has to work from. The world as it was on the day he went under. And so it stays that way. Season after season, decade after decade, the same house, the same children, the same wife, the same town. The celebrity appearances, which become increasingly frequent and increasingly surreal in the later seasons, also fit the theory. Homer is lying in a hospital room. There is likely a television in that room. There are voices at his bedside, nurses and doctors speaking, his family coming and going, talking, referencing things from the outside world. His unconscious brain does not shut off. It absorbs. It processes ambient stimuli. It hears names, recognizes voices, catches fragments of songs or news broadcasts, or conversations happening just outside the edge of his awareness. And it incorporates them into the dream. That is why later seasons are so saturated with famous people, not because Springfield became a magnet for celebrity, because Homer's brain has been absorbing cultural flotsam from the hospital room for decades and weaving it into the simulation. Every celebrity who shows up in Springfield is a voice Homer heard through the fog of unconsciousness, translated into a dream character by a mind trying desperately to keep its private world populated and alive. The show's own writers have engaged with this theory directly. In season 34, an episode included a deliberately leaked, fake deleted scene in which Homer wakes from a long coma, and the reveal confirms that every outlandish thing that had happened was just a dream. The scene was framed as a hoax, planted by hackers, not real, not canonical. The writers created it specifically as a reference to the fan theory. They animated it. They gave it a full production. And then they denied it. But the fact that they made it tells you something. You do not spend the production resources to animate a fake scene addressing a theory unless the theory has real cultural weight, unless it has spread far enough and resonated deeply enough that it deserves acknowledgement. The writers know about the coma theory. They have lived with it, and their denial came wrapped inside an episode that depicted Homer waking from a coma. They showed you the answer and called it a joke, and the audience laughed, exactly the way Homer laughed when the doctor told him he had permanently lost 5% of his brain. The theory was also addressed by executive producer Al Jean in 2015, who called it fan speculation and dismissed it. But Al Jean did not explain the tonal shift. He did not explain the aging freeze. He did not explain why God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the coma. He did not explain why the show's storylines have become progressively more untethered from reality with each passing season, in exactly the pattern you would expect from a dreaming brain experiencing gradual deterioration. He just said it was not true, and the interview ended. The theory endures because it does something no official explanation has ever done. It makes the show make sense. All of it. At once. And it does one more thing, something that takes a television show about a cartoon family and transforms it into something genuinely moving. If the coma theory is true, then the emotional core of The Simpsons is not comedy. It is grief. It is the grief of a man who knows, somewhere in the deepest unexamined part of his sleeping mind, that he is missing his life, that his children are growing up without him, that his wife is sitting in that hospital room, growing older than the image of her he is dreaming about. And so he dreams the only dream that makes the loss bearable. He dreams that they are still there. He dreams that Bart is still his mischievous little boy. He dreams that Lisa still plays saxophone in her room while he tries to sleep. He dreams that Maggie is still small enough to fit in the crook of his arm. He dreams that Marge still looks at him with patience and love, even when he has done something ridiculous, even when he has failed her again. He dreams that Friday night at the Simpson house never ends. And in the coma, it does not. The dream gives him everything. His family preserved exactly as it was. His children never growing up, never leaving, never becoming the strangers that children eventually and inevitably become to their parents. His wife never leaving. His life never ending. Homer's coma is not a horror story. In the most heartbreaking reading of it, it is the only heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever think to ask for. A house on Evergreen Terrace where the kids are always young and the beer is always cold and nobody ever has to say goodbye. And every time the credits roll, every time the episode ends and the family resets, every time Homer survives something impossible and stumbles home to his couch. That is not lazy writing. That is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, he might have to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed. Number Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? The case was never closed. Ask someone who shot Mr. Burns and they will tell you Maggie Simpson. The show said so. The baby did it. Case closed. Except the case has never actually been closed. The more carefully you look at the evidence, the more the official verdict falls apart. And what you are left with, once the Maggie explanation starts to crack, is something far more interesting, a mystery that the show may have intentionally designed to be unsolvable, staffed with genuine suspects, and sealed shut with an answer that was never meant to withstand serious scrutiny. Let us go back to the beginning, because the setup deserves to be told properly. Season 6, Episode 25. Who Shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. This aired in the summer of 1995, and it was something that had never been attempted by an animated television show before. A genuine, premeditated viewer participation mystery. A whodunit cliffhanger so carefully constructed that the show's creators invited the American public to guess the answer. The prize was significant. The winner would be animated into a future episode of the show. Fox promoted it like a national event. America's Most Wanted produced a special called Springfield's Most Wanted, treating the fictional crime as though it were a real unsolved case. Newspapers ran coverage. The Simpsons was not just a television show that summer, it was a national puzzle. And the puzzle had been set up with real craft. Mr. Burns had spent the episode accumulating enemies at a rate that would have been impressive even for him. He had stolen an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary, destroying the school's budget in the process. He had bankrupted Moe's Tavern. He had created a sinkhole that collapsed the Springfield retirement castle. He had injured Santa's little helper. And, for his final act, the act that pushed everyone from mild frustration to genuine homicidal consideration, he had built a massive mechanical disc and used it to physically block the sun over Springfield. Not as a metaphor. Literally, he stole the sunlight from an entire town so that every resident would be forced to purchase electricity from his plant, because without the sun, nothing else would work. When Smithers, his loyal and long-suffering assistant, objected to this plan on ethical grounds, Burns fired him on the spot. And then Burns went to the town meeting, where every single person in Springfield had gathered with the specific intention of confronting him. The show took its time establishing motives. Homer, because Burns had never once remembered his name despite years of direct employment. Bart and Lisa, because their school had been gutted. Grandpa Simpson, because the retirement home had been destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because he had lost his job. Tito Puente, because the music program had been cut. Moe, because his bar was gone. Even Smithers, freshly fired, humiliated in front of the town, spiraling into alcoholism. The meeting ended. Burns walked away. A gunshot was heard. Burns staggered to the town sundial and fell, his hands landing on two letters, W and S. Or, from Burns's own perspective, M and S. America spent the entire summer thinking about this. When Part 2 arrived in September 1995, the investigation played out as a comedic procedural. Smithers confessed immediately, which the show treated as suspicious rather than conclusive. Because Smithers's confession came apart quickly, he had been in a state of blackout intoxication at the time of the shooting, and had, in fact, shot someone else entirely. Old Jasper, specifically. In his wooden leg. Wrong person, wrong location, wrong crime. Not Burns. The investigation proceeded. Suspects were eliminated one by one with varying degrees of dignity. Principal Skinner had an alibi. Moe had an alibi. Tito Puente had what is genuinely one of the most memorable alibis in television history, a fully performed samba, composed specifically to channel his rage away from violence. The police found an eyelash on Burns's suit. DNA analysis identified it as belonging to a member of the Simpson family. Homer's fingerprints were on the gun. Homer had the clearest individual motive in the whole town. Homer was arrested. And then Burns woke up from his coma and identified the shooter. It was Maggie. According to Burns's account, he encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun fell from his holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. The case was declared closed. The chief noted that no jury would convict a baby he specifically, memorably, adds, except maybe in Texas. And that was that. Homer was released. Maggie went home. Springfield went back to normal. Except none of it makes sense when you look at it carefully. Start with the contest. Fox had invited the viewing public to submit their guesses. The winner would be animated into the show. Thousands of entries came in. The producers reviewed a randomly selected sample of those entries. According to the DVD commentary for the episode, not a single person in the sample guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The person who was awarded the prize was chosen at random from the pool of incorrect answers and, since they had not guessed correctly, received a cash payment instead of the promised animation. The writers acknowledge on that same commentary that there was one person, one who had posted the correct answer to a Simpsons newsgroup online on the night of the original broadcast. That person was using a college internet account. By the time the contest closed and the producers tried to find them, the account no longer existed. They issued an open invitation on the DVD for this person to come forward. They never did. Think about what this means. The show was designed as a solvable mystery. The creators said so publicly. They built a national contest around the premise that the clues in Part 1 contained enough information to identify the shooter. And when the answer was revealed, essentially nobody in the entire viewing audience had figured it out. Either the clues were not sufficient to lead viewers to the correct conclusion, or the answer did not actually follow from the evidence in the way the show claimed it did. Or both. Now, look at the clues themselves. Burns falls on the sundial. His hands point to W and S, which from Burns's inverted perspective become M and S. The show tells us this means Maggie Simpson. M for Maggie, S for Simpson. Burns himself, canonically and on the record, said that his hands landing on those letters was not intentional. He did not position himself deliberately to spell out his attacker's initials. He just fell and his hands went where they went. The sundial clue, the centerpiece of the show's resolution, the detail that most clearly points toward Maggie, was explicitly described by the victim as a coincidence. The most important clue in the whole mystery is meaningless according to the person it supposedly came from. Then there is the gun. Burns carried a gun in a holster. In the episode, the holster is shown to be empty before the shooting. The gun was already missing from Burns's person before he was attacked. This means whoever shot Burns used his own weapon, a weapon that someone had already removed from him, or a weapon he had dropped and someone had found. This detail is crucial because it changes the profile of the shooter significantly. The person who shot Burns was not someone who came to the town meeting armed and intending violence. They were someone who either encountered the gun by chance, or knew where Burns kept it, or had access to him before the meeting ended. A baby finding a gun on the ground after it had been dropped fits this profile, yes. But so do about a dozen other characters who were present that evening and were not carrying their own weapons. Burns's last words before the shooting were, "Oh, it's you." He was not afraid. He was not surprised. He recognized the person standing in front of him. He greeted them with the mild, slightly weary familiarity of someone encountering an acquaintance they did not particularly expect to see. Does Mr. Burns, the man who cannot reliably remember the name of his own employee despite decades of direct interaction, look at Maggie Simpson, an infant he has no established relationship with, and say, with comfortable recognition, "Oh, it's you?" The show has never given Burns and Maggie a meaningful prior interaction. He barely knows Homer. The idea that he would calmly and familiarly acknowledge a baby in a parking lot does not track with a man for whom recognizing people has always been a specific and documented problem. In Season 18, Homer confesses. Not in a dramatic, plot-driving way, not in a way that reopens the case or sends the investigation in a new direction. Homer just says, out loud, on camera, that he was the one who shot Burns. He says it casually. The show treats it as a throwaway moment. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens anything. Homer confesses to attempted murder and the narrative moves on. This could be Homer lying for attention, which is not outside his established behavioral range. It could also be the truth. And if it is the truth, then Maggie was framed. An infant was blamed for something her father did, protected from prosecution by her age and the impossibility of convicting a baby, while the actual shooter went free, because everyone was so relieved to have an answer that they did not examine whether the answer was real. The Marge theory deserves serious consideration. A detailed analysis of the episodes in question makes a compelling case. Marge is a devoted mother. She had watched Burns systematically destroy her children's school, injure her family's dog, steal the sunlight from the town where her family lives. She had every reason to want Burns stopped. In the episode Marge Gets a Job, which aired before the shooting, Burns becomes infatuated with Marge. He develops feelings for her that are, within the show's internal logic, genuine. And the theory argues that this is precisely why Burns did not name her as his attacker when he woke from his coma. He recognized her. He protected her. He took the bullet, regained consciousness, looked around the hospital room and chose not to identify the woman he had feelings for. allowing the investigation to settle on whatever answer would cause the least disruption. Maggie became the answer because Maggie was the perfect answer. A baby cannot be prosecuted. A baby cannot defend herself against an accusation because a baby cannot speak. A baby cannot understand the charge being made against her. And a baby cannot be punished regardless of what she is found to have done. Blaming Maggie was the cleanest possible resolution for everyone except Maggie, and nobody in Springfield, certainly not Chief Wiggum's police department, had any particular interest in a resolution that created more paperwork. The alternate endings make the murkiness even murkier. A complete alternate conclusion was fully animated, fully voiced, and fully produced, in which Smithers is revealed as the real shooter. This ending was shown to audiences in a clip show episode hosted by a character who dismisses it by saying it would not have made sense because the DNA evidence would have had to be ignored, which would be, in his words, downright nutty. The writers then immediately, in the same episode, draw a direct comparison to the O.J. Simpson trial, where a jury ignored DNA evidence to reach a verdict. The show is winking at you. It is telling you that ignoring evidence happens. It is telling you that official answers are not necessarily correct answers. It is telling you that the people in power point at whatever answer is most convenient and then make it the truth through institutional authority rather than investigative rigor. An early draft of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers considered it seriously enough to develop it as an option. They planned to send Barney to prison. They abandoned it. But the existence of this alternate path confirms something important. The answer was never predetermined by the clues. The clues were adjusted to support whatever answer the writers eventually chose. The mystery was reverse engineered. The conclusion came first, and the evidence was arranged around it afterward, which is, by the way, exactly how the Springfield justice system operates, as any viewer who has watched Chief Wiggum function for more than 3 consecutive episodes will already know. And then there is the final shot of the episode. After everyone has left the room, after the case has been officially closed and Maggie declared the shooter and the investigation ended, Maggie is alone. She looks around. She checks to make sure nobody is watching. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics the pulling of a trigger. The show presents this as confirmation. Maggie knows what she did. Maggie is reenacting the moment. The case is closed. But it could also be read as a baby imitating something she witnessed. Children imitate actions they observe around them. This is one of the earliest and most fundamental ways human beings learn. Maggie watched someone shoot Burns, and she is repeating the motion, not because she was the one who performed it, but because she saw it happen and her brain is processing it the way all infant brains process extraordinary experiences, through repetition, through physical reenactment, through the mimicry of something she does not yet have the language or the cognitive framework to understand. Maggie is not confessing. Maggie is remembering. The greatest mystery in the history of The Simpsons was not solved when Burns woke up and pointed. It was closed. And in Springfield, those are 2 fundamentally different things. Number Section 4. How is Mr. Burns still alive? The immortality question. Charles Montgomery Burns is old. This is not a casual observation. This is not a joke about how the cartoon makes him look frail. Within the established canon of The Simpsons, within the timeline the show has constructed across decades of episodes, Burns was born sometime in the late 1800s. He has personal memories of events from before the turn of the 20th century. He has told stories about things he witnessed in the 1910s as though he experienced them firsthand. He attended Yale. He served in some capacity during World War II, a service that the show repeatedly hints was not entirely honorable. He knew Howard Hughes. He interacted with historical figures who died before most of the show's current audience was born. By the most conservative reading of the show's internal timeline, Burns is somewhere north of 100 years old. By the more expansive readings, accounting for various flashback episodes and the contradictory details that accumulate across 36 seasons, he could be pushing 140. And he is not just alive, he is functional. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He manipulates local politics with the ease of someone who has been doing it for a very long time. Because he has. He orchestrates schemes that require sustained intelligence, long-term planning, and a working familiarity with modern technology and modern finance. His body is brittle, yes. His physical strength is almost non-existent. He cannot open a child-proof medicine cap. He cannot support his own weight without his cane. A strong wind is a genuine threat to his structural integrity. But his mind is sharp. It is razor sharp. Burns is, by almost any measure, the most strategically intelligent character in Springfield. And he has been operating at that level for longer than any human mind should be able to sustain coherent function. The show addresses the how of this in an episode that most people remember for other reasons. In the Springfield Files, the X-Files crossover episode, in which Homer believes he has encountered an alien in the woods, the truth that eventually emerges is that the alien was not an alien at all. It was Burns. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so saturated with pharmaceutical and radiological components, that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow for some time afterward. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without it, he dies. The margin for error is precisely 0. This is not a medication he takes for quality of life. This is life support in a form that no other character in the show has access to, and no other character in the show could afford. After each weekly session, Burns leaves the treatment facility in what the show describes as a dazed, euphoric state. He wanders through the woods outside Springfield. He stumbles. He glows. He looks, to any observer who does not know what they are seeing, exactly like something that should not exist. Homer sees him and concludes, immediately and with total conviction, that he is witnessing an alien from outer space. Not radiation, not a man who works in a nuclear facility, not the most obvious explanation for why someone might be glowing in the dark in a town with an active reactor. An alien. This is the show telling you something about Springfield in miniature. The most obvious explanation, the one that requires no supernatural leap whatsoever, is invisible to the people who live there. They have been conditioned, through decades of exposure and accommodation and collective agreement, to not see what is directly in front of them. Burns is the product of his own plant, staggering through his own town like a ghost, and the residents look at him and reach for mythology before they reach for the obvious. But what the episode reveals about Burns's medical situation is staggering if you sit with it. Burns is not surviving through biology. He is surviving through technology and wealth. His body has been so fundamentally altered by his proximity to nuclear material, a proximity he has maintained, and in many cases orchestrated, over his entire extraordinary lifespan, that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. He requires external radiation input the way ordinary humans require food and water. Deprive him of his weekly treatment, and his system shuts down within 7 days. He is not alive in any conventional biological sense. He is maintained specifically by a treatment regimen that his wealth makes accessible and his intelligence makes him capable of managing, and maintained in the day-to-day logistics of that regimen by Waylon Smithers. Smithers is Burns's assistant. The show has established this relationship across hundreds of episodes, and the surface reading of it is fairly simple, devoted, somewhat pathologically devoted employee who has organized his entire life around the needs of his employer. The show frequently plays Smithers's devotion for humor, and there is a great deal of comedy to be found in the dynamic. But under the lens of the immortality theory, something shifts. Smithers does not just manage Burns's schedule, he manages Burns's survival. He ensures that Burns reaches every weekly treatment on time. He monitors Burns's physical condition with the kind of vigilance that, in any other context, would be described as medical. He is aware of what happens if Burns misses a dose, and that awareness functions as the chain that binds him to his employer more securely than any professional obligation or personal affection ever could. Without Smithers, Burns misses a treatment. Without the treatment, the biological equilibrium that keeps him alive collapses. Every illness in his body, and Burns has all of them. The show makes this explicit in one of its most famous scenes, when a doctor informs Burns that he simultaneously has every disease known to medical science surges forward simultaneously. The reason Burns is not killed by any one of these diseases is that they are all present at once, each one blocking the others from gaining dominance. The doctor calls it Three Stooges syndrome. 3 people all trying to fit through a doorway at once. None of them can get through. It is played as comedy. It is one of the most quoted moments in the show's history. But the image underneath the joke is deeply strange. Burns is not healthy. Burns is catastrophically, comprehensively ill. He carries within him the full catalog of human disease, every pathogen, every degenerative condition, every terminal diagnosis that medicine has ever documented. They are all in him, simultaneously, balanced against each other in a state of perfect and precarious stasis that could collapse at any moment. The weekly radiation treatments are not curing Burns. They are regulating him. They are adjusting the internal balance to prevent any single illness from gaining the advantage that would make it lethal. His body is a reactor, and his treatments are the control rods. Pull them away and everything overloads at once. This is why Smithers stays. Not entirely because of love, not entirely because of loyalty, not entirely because of the psychological complexity of a man who has devoted himself completely to someone who, in many respects, does not deserve it. Smithers stays because he understands, in a way that nobody else in Springfield does, that his absence is a death sentence. And Smithers, whatever his other complicated qualities, is not the kind of person who can hold that knowledge and act on it. Burns's connection to historical events adds a further layer to the mystery. The show has depicted him referencing, or claiming direct personal involvement with, an extraordinary range of historical moments. He knew the Gilded Age not as history but as personal memory. His family's wealth predates the Industrial Revolution. The Burns dynasty, as the show occasionally sketches it in flashback and reference, is one of the oldest concentrations of continuous private wealth in American history. Not just wealthy people who pass their money down through generations. A single, unbroken lineage of influence and resource that has been operational for longer than most American institutions have existed. The current Burns has been the public face of this dynasty for over a century. He took control of an enterprise that was already ancient when he assumed leadership of it. And he has maintained that control, adapting to every economic and technological shift that the 20th and 21st centuries have delivered without ever appearing to fundamentally change. The question the show never answers is whether Burns is unique in his longevity, or whether the Burns dynasty has always found ways to extend the productive lifespans of its key figures beyond what normal biology would permit. If the current Burns has been kept alive through radiation treatments and pharmaceutical intervention and extraordinary wealth for over a century, did previous holders of the Burns legacy use comparable methods? Before nuclear radiation, before modern medicine, before any of the technology that currently sustains him, what did the Burns family use? The show does not say, but it does establish, through the accumulation of historical references and implied timelines, that the Burns dynasty has exercised continuous control over its fortune for longer than most American families have surnames. That kind of continuity does not happen through normal succession. Normal succession involves the death of the current holder, the redistribution of assets, the adjustment of influence. Continuous control of this kind requires something else, either extraordinary longevity or an ability to transfer power so completely and so invisibly that the transition does not disrupt the underlying machinery. Burns has been shot. He has been hospitalized dozens of times. He has collapsed, fallen, been attacked, and abandoned and poisoned. And every single time he comes back. Not because of cartoon resilience, Homer recovers from injuries through the show's logic of comedy, and Burns recovers through a different mechanism entirely. Burns recovers through infrastructure, through money, through the systems he has spent his very long life building specifically to ensure that, no matter what happens to his physical body, there will always be someone standing by with the resources to restore function. Homer's immortality, in the coma theory, is passive. It is the side effect of not actually being in his body at all. Burns's immortality is engineered. Every institution he has corrupted, every politician he has bought, every doctor he has retained, every research facility he has funded, all of it serves one ultimate purpose: keep Burns alive. Keep the treatments coming. Keep the balance maintained. Keep the reactor running. Because if Burns dies, everything he has built has to answer for what it has done. And empires do not allow themselves to die if they can possibly avoid it. The most unsettling dimension of this theory is not about Burns at all. It is about Springfield. The town's entire economic infrastructure is dependent on the power plant. The power plant is dependent on Burns. Burns is dependent on a treatment regimen that requires an extraordinary concentration of wealth and infrastructure. The wealth and infrastructure are maintained by the power plant. It is a closed loop, a self-sustaining system in which the man, the machine, and the money feed each other in an endless cycle that cannot be interrupted from the inside because all of its components are dependent on all of its other components. Springfield cannot kill Burns because Springfield cannot survive without Burns, and Burns cannot die because dying would require the system to exist without him, which it was never designed to do. He is not immortal. He is something more specific than immortal, and in some ways more terrifying. He is too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying the bill for as long as Burns keeps the lights on, which, if his treatment schedule holds, will be a very long time indeed. Number. Section 5. The Principal and the Pauper the day Springfield voted to make truth illegal. There is one episode of The Simpsons that fans have been arguing about for almost 30 years, and the argument almost always goes the same way. The fans say the episode destroyed a beloved character and betrayed the audience's trust. The defenders say the fans are being too harsh and that the episode is not as bad as its reputation suggests. And then, occasionally, someone comes along and makes a completely different argument that both sides are missing the point. That this episode is not a mistake or a misstep or even a creative choice that simply did not land. It is a diagnosis. It is the show showing you, with unusual directness, the mechanism that makes Springfield possible. The episode is The Principal and the Pauper, Season 9, Episode 2. It aired on the 28th of September 1997. It has been called the moment The Simpsons went wrong, the episode that broke the show's continuity, the point at which the writers stopped caring about their own characters. It is consistently ranked among the worst episodes in the series' history. Harry Shearer, who voices the character at the center of the story, publicly expressed his displeasure with the storyline at the time. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner for 20 years of service to the school. During the celebration, a stranger walks in. He is a man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, decorated Vietnam War veteran, former prisoner of war in Southeast Asia, and the actual person whose name and identity the man Springfield has known as their principal has been using for the past 2 decades. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before the Vietnam War, he was a petty criminal, a kid with no prospects and no future, drafted into the military and placed in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt responsible. He came to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to his mother, Agnes. But Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son, and Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had a family or an identity worth protecting, went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the life, the mother. He spent 20 years building an identity inside someone else's history. And then the real Skinner walked in, and the whole thing collapsed. Now, what happens next is where the episode becomes something more than a controversial storyline. Something more than a continuity error or a character assassination. Springfield holds a meeting. The real Skinner is there, Tamzarian is there. The truth is fully exposed. Everyone in the room understands that their principal is not who he has claimed to be for 2 decades. And the town makes a decision. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree that Tamzarian is the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war hero, the man whose identity was stolen, is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal, under penalty of physical torture, to ever mention the truth again. Let that settle. A community collectively decides that their comfort is more important than the truth. They have the proof right in front of them. They have the actual person whose life was stolen standing in the room. And they choose the fake. They choose the lie. They exile the truth and criminalize the act of speaking it. Fans hated this. The criticism was fierce and it was immediate, and it has never fully faded. The argument was that the episode destroyed Skinner as a character by retroactively revealing that everything we knew about him was built on fiction. His military service, his relationship with Agnes, his long antagonistic dynamic with Bart. All of it was a borrowed life. The episode took a beloved character and replaced him with a stranger. But here is the argument those critics are not making, because making it means looking at the episode from a different angle. The episode is completely honest about what Springfield is. It just says it out loud for once. It shows you the mechanism that makes the show function. It shows you the vote. It shows you the legal decree. It shows you the physical removal of the person who represents inconvenient truth. It makes explicit something that every other episode of the series has depicted implicitly. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable facts. It has always agreed to forget whatever does not fit the narrative. It has always reset after catastrophic events, absorbing world-altering occurrences and returning to baseline without acknowledgement. The only thing different about The Principal and the Pauper is that this time the show does not cut away. It does not let the reset happen off-screen. It makes you watch it. It shows you every step, the gathering, the debate, the vote, the decree, the expulsion, the explicit criminalization of the truth. Every other time Springfield forgets a disaster, every other time the slate is wiped and the town returns to normal after something impossible, it happens between episodes, in the unseen space between one credit sequence and the next. The Principal and the Pauper is the one time the show sat you down and made you watch the mechanism function in real time. Consider the pattern. Springfield has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. It has been invaded. It has been sealed under a federal dome for environmental containment. It has survived nuclear near misses and environmental catastrophes and the literal deprivation of sunlight. And every single time by the next episode, everything is restored. Nobody references what happened. Nobody processes it. Nobody carries the weight of it forward into their daily life. The slate is clean and Springfield goes on. Most viewers accept this as episodic storytelling. The show resets between episodes because that is how episodic television works. Characters cannot carry permanent consequences because permanent consequences would make every future story contingent on every past story, and that level of continuity is difficult to maintain across hundreds of episodes and decades of production. This is a reasonable explanation for why the show does what it does from a production standpoint. But it does not explain why the show does what it does within its own internal logic. And The Principal and the Pauper offers a fourth explanation, one that does not rely on cartoon convention or production necessity. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset, collectively, deliberately, through an unspoken social contract that says, we will not acknowledge what happened. We will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. We will treat the lie as truth and the truth as criminal, and anyone who breaks this contract will be removed. This is not a cartoon trope. This is how real communities work. Small towns, in particular, have a well-documented capacity for collective denial. Scandals get buried. Crimes get forgotten. Uncomfortable histories get rewritten until the official version is the only version that survives in local memory. The mechanisms are rarely as explicit as a judge issuing a legal decree. They are usually quieter. A community simply agrees, through social pressure and the passage of time and the gradual erosion of inconvenient memory, to not talk about certain things. And the people who insist on talking about those things find themselves slowly edged out of the social fabric until they are effectively expelled, not by a railroad car, but by the thousand small exclusions that constitute real community life. The Principal and the Pauper did not break The Simpsons. It diagnosed Springfield. It showed you that the town's amnesia is not a bug in the show's storytelling logic. It is a feature of the community itself, a defense mechanism employed by a population that cannot afford to confront its actual situation, because confronting it would require acknowledging too many things at once. If they acknowledge that the Principal is an imposter, they would have to examine what else they have accepted without question. If they examined that, they might start looking at the power plant. If they looked at the power plant, they would have to look at Burns. If they looked at Burns, the economy collapses. If the economy collapses, the town dies. And so they do not look. They vote not to look. They make looking illegal. They tie the truth to a train and send it away from the city limits. The real Seymour Skinner was the canary in the coal mine, a man who arrived with incontrovertible proof that the official narrative was a fiction. And Springfield's response was not to thank him. It was to criminalize his existence and expel him from the community. If the coma theory holds alongside this, the episode takes on another dimension entirely. If everything since season 4 is Homer's dream, then Homer's unconscious mind invented a scenario in which a town votes to sustain a lie, because that is what Homer needs to believe at the deepest level. He needs to believe that lies can be made permanent through collective agreement. He needs to believe that a stolen identity can become real if enough people agree to treat it as real. He needs to believe that the fake version of a life can replace the real one without consequence, because Homer's coma is exactly that, a fake life replacing a real one, a dream masquerading as reality. And as long as nobody questions it, as long as the dream keeps running and the town keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to confront what the waking world might look like now. The Principal and the Pauper is not the worst episode of The Simpsons. It is, in the most uncomfortable possible sense, the most important one. Because it is the only episode that does not allow you to look away from Springfield's central mechanism. The machinery of denial, the social contract of forgetting, the quiet, collective, legally enforced decision to call the lie the truth and exile anyone who says otherwise. Armin Tamzarian is still pretending to be Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. And somewhere out there, tied to a train, exiled from his own name, the last honest man in a town that made honesty a crime is still out there. He was the truth Springfield could not afford to keep. So Springfield got rid of him. And then Springfield went back to normal, which, of course, is exactly what Springfield does. Number Section 6. Maggie Simpson. The silent one is the most dangerous. Maggie Simpson does not talk. She does not walk reliably. She communicates through the sound of a pacifier and the occasional pointed stare from eyes that are, if you take the show seriously, carrying significantly more behind them than any infant's eyes should. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. And in that time, without forming a single coherent sentence, she has accomplished more than every other member of her family combined. She shot a billionaire. She organized and led a daycare rebellion against a tyrannical caretaker and won. She has saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations, each time operating below the radar of every adult in her vicinity. She has demonstrated problem-solving intelligence that would be remarkable in a trained adult, in a body that cannot reliably cross a room without falling over. She has been tested, within the show's canon, and found to possess cognitive abilities that the available instruments simply cannot measure properly because they were not designed to measure intelligence of this kind in a person of this age. And through all of it, every remarkable thing she has ever done, she has maintained her silence. Not because she cannot speak, because she has decided not to. Let us start with the moment that defines her in the public imagination, even though it is, in some ways, the least interesting thing about her. The shooting. We have already spent considerable time with the Who Shot Mr. Burns mystery in an earlier section, so we will not retrace all of that ground. But the aftermath of the shooting is worth sitting with separately because it illuminates something specific about Maggie's character. A baby was identified as the person who shot the wealthiest and most powerful individual in Springfield. The police investigated. The evidence was examined. The chief of police reviewed the findings and concluded, without detectable ambivalence, that yes, this infant committed an act of violence against a grown man, and there is nothing to be done about it. The investigation was closed. Maggie went home. And then the final shot of the episode. Everyone has left the room. Maggie is alone. She looks around the space with the careful, deliberate attention of someone who is checking to confirm that they are not being observed. She makes sure. Then she moves her pacifier in a motion that, unmistakably, mimics pulling a trigger. Most readings of this moment treat it as a confession. Maggie knows what she did. She is reenacting it in private because even she understands that doing it in front of witnesses would have implications. Case closed, baby confirmed, mystery solved. But notice the sequence of actions. She looks around first. She checks her surroundings. She confirms that nobody is watching, and then she performs the gesture. That sequence check for observers, confirm privacy, then act is not reflexive behavior. It is not the behavior of a baby randomly moving her mouth or replaying motor memory without cognitive awareness. It is a deliberate, staged, private reenactment of something she is aware she should not do in front of others. That requires situational awareness. It requires the understanding that an action has social consequences and that the performance of that action in front of certain audiences would trigger responses she would prefer to avoid. It requires the ability to evaluate her environment and make a strategic decision based on that evaluation. These are not infant capabilities. These are the capabilities of someone who thinks about what they are doing before they do it. In 2012, The Simpsons produced a theatrical short film called The Longest Daycare, 7 minutes, shown in cinemas before Ice Age, Continental Drift, nominated for an Academy Award. And in those 7 minutes, Maggie Simpson demonstrates intelligence that is genuinely startling to watch once you understand what you are seeing. The premise: Maggie is dropped off at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare run with authoritarian efficiency by a caretaker who sorts the children by intelligence on arrival. Maggie is assessed as an average intelligence baby and placed accordingly. Inside the facility, she discovers a caterpillar that is beginning to transform into a butterfly. She wants to protect it. Another baby, a recurring antagonist named Gerald, memorable for his single giant unibrow, wants to destroy it. What follows is 7 minutes of Maggie outmaneuvering the bully, the daycare staff, and the facility's security systems through observation, planning, and improvisation. She does all of this without speaking. She does it through environmental reading. She identifies the threats, she assesses the resources available to her, she develops a plan, and she executes it through a series of steps that each require the successful completion of the previous step. She improvises when things go wrong. She adapts when her initial approach fails. She reads other people's behavior and predicts it accurately enough to plan around it. Her body is barely keeping up with her. She falls. She crawls when running would serve her better. She is physically limited in every way that a 1-year-old is physically limited. But her decision-making is flawless. Every choice she makes in that facility is the correct choice. And she succeeds because her cognitive capacity compensates entirely for every physical limitation her age imposes on her. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly in various episodes. The results are variable because the show is not always operating from a consistent internal logic on this point. But the implication is constant. Maggie is not measuring as a normal baby. In certain canonical moments, her intelligence registers as extraordinary beyond what the instruments are designed to measure, beyond what the testers expected, beyond what the show is willing to fully explore in any single episode before moving on. And then, of course, there is the silence. Maggie's first spoken word was Daddy. It was voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in what amounted to a celebrity cameo. The moment was treated as significant within the episode that contained it, and then it was never followed up. Maggie went back to the pacifier. 36 years of television have gone by without Maggie developing language in any meaningful way. She is surrounded by some of the most verbally active people in Springfield. Homer never stops talking. Marge expresses every concern and emotion as it occurs to her. Bart has built his entire identity around the performance of provocation, which requires constant, elaborate verbal production. Lisa never stops analyzing, questioning, lecturing, debating. The Simpson household is a wall of constant language from every direction. And in the center of it, Maggie sits in silence, watching, listening, processing. The theory, the one that makes everything about Maggie click into place, is that her silence is not developmental delay. It is a strategic decision. It is the conscious choice of a mind intelligent enough to understand what visibility costs in Springfield. Look at what happens to intelligent women in this family. Lisa Simpson is brilliant. She knows it. Springfield knows it. And the result of that visibility has been, across 36 seasons, isolation and friction, and the particular exhaustion of being the person in the room who understands things that the room does not want to understand. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. Lisa challenges authority and gets punished. Lisa tries to improve the world around her and discovers that the world around her has no interest in being improved by an 8-year-old girl with a saxophone. Lisa's intelligence is extraordinary, and it has cost her socially for her entire depicted life because she wears it on the outside. She announces it. She cannot help announcing it because Lisa is constitutionally incapable of pretending she does not see the things she sees. Maggie has been watching Lisa do this since she was born. She has watched the smartest person in the household fight for acknowledgement every single day and receive, in return, resistance and dismissal, and the particular loneliness of being the person who sees clearly in a town that has collectively decided not to. Maggie has watched this happen, and she has learned from it. Not the lesson Lisa learned, which is to keep fighting, to keep speaking, to keep insisting on the truth, regardless of what it costs personally. Maggie learned the opposite lesson. Silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less attention you draw to yourself, the more you can accomplish. Because the people who are watching you cannot stop what they cannot see. Think about every significant thing Maggie has done. She shot Burns, and the investigation focused on everyone except the baby, because who seriously considers an infant as the primary suspect? She organized the daycare rebellion, and nobody monitored the infants closely enough to see it coming. Every heroic act, every display of intelligence, every moment where Maggie quietly saves the situation or solves the problem, it happens in the margins. In the spaces where nobody is paying close enough attention. Maggie has built the most effective disguise available to her. She performs exactly what everyone expects a baby to be. Quiet, passive, dependent, helpless, and she is none of those things. She is the opposite of all of them. She is the most capable member of the Simpson family, operating without detection beneath the radar of everyone who should, by any reasonable standard, have noticed by now. Now connect this to the radiation theory. If Springfield's contaminated environment creates mutations, and if those mutations affect each individual differently depending on variables of genetics and exposure and timing, and a dozen other factors that radiation biology is still working to fully understand, then Maggie represents the far end of a spectrum that starts with Homer. Homer's mutation diminished him. Something about the combination of his genetic baseline, his years of direct reactor exposure, and the additional damage of the crayon reduced his cognitive function to a level that qualifies as clinical disability. He is not stupid by nature. The show proves this by showing you what he is when the obstruction is removed. But he is stupid by accumulation, by everything that has been done to him and everything he has had done to his brain across a lifetime in Springfield. Maggie's mutation did something different. Where Homer's intelligence was suppressed, Maggie's was amplified. The same environmental cause, the same contaminated water and irradiated air, but a different result. One that the instruments cannot properly measure because they were not designed to account for this kind of outcome. Homer and Maggie are two expressions of the same radioactive reality. He is what happens when contamination takes something away. She is what happens when it gives something extraordinary. And if the coma theory holds, Maggie's intelligence becomes something else entirely. Something heartbreaking. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode is the product of an unconscious mind trying to hold on to his family in the absence of any real contact with them, then Maggie's extraordinary capability is Homer's deepest hope for his youngest child, projected into the dream, because it is the only place he can put it. He cannot see her grow. He cannot watch her learn to walk properly, to talk, to become whoever she is going to become without him there. He has no information about what she is like at 5 or 10 or 20. He only knows her as the baby she was on the day he went under, and so in the dream he makes her extraordinary. He gives her an intelligence that transcends her age. He makes her capable of things no real infant could do. Because in his coma, Homer needs to believe that Maggie will be okay. He needs to believe she does not need him there to protect her, that she has within her everything she will ever need. Her genius is not a mutation. In that reading, it is a father's prayer. The most specific and tender prayer you can pray for a child you cannot reach. But there is a darker reading that sits alongside that one, and it is the reading that the waking world of Springfield, if there still is a waking world, supports more fully. Maggie does not speak because she has assessed speaking and found it insufficient to her purposes. She does not reveal her intelligence because intelligence is punished in Springfield, and she has watched the evidence of this for her entire depicted life. She watches everything. She processes everything. She understands the architecture of everything around her. And she waits. For what? The show has never told us. Maggie's endgame is genuinely unknown. It is the last truly open variable in the Simpson family story. Every other character has been fully explored, their limitations and capabilities mapped across decades of episodes. But Maggie remains an open question. We know what she is capable of in glimpses. We have seen her shoot a man. We have seen her command a room full of babies through some combination of charisma and tactical intelligence that the show does not fully explain. We have seen her solve problems that adults could not solve, in environments designed for adults, using only the resources available to a physically limited infant. We have seen glimpses of what Maggie is. We have not seen what Maggie intends. And maybe that is the scariest thing about her. Not what she has already done, but what she has not done yet. Behind the pacifier, behind the enormous eyes, behind 36 years of deliberate, strategic, patient silence, something is planning, something is waiting, something is watching the family and the town and the world with an intelligence that nobody has taken seriously and nobody has tried to contain. When Maggie Simpson finally decides to act, when she decides the moment is right, when she breaks the silence she has maintained across decades of depicted life, Springfield will not see it coming. That is exactly how she designed it. Number. Section 7. The predictions. How the Simpsons writes the future and why it works. There is a game the internet plays with the Simpsons. It has been going on for years now, and it shows no signs of stopping. The game works like this. Something happens in the real world, an event, a development, a piece of news that strikes people as surprising or strange or significant. And then someone pulls out a screenshot from an old Simpsons episode, and the screenshot shows something that looks, with varying degrees of precision, like the thing that just happened. And the internet loses its mind. The Simpsons predicted it. The Simpsons knew. How did they know? The predictions are famous. They are more famous now than many of the episodes they came from. And the list has grown long enough that even people who have not watched the show in 20 years have a passing familiarity with the greatest hits. In the year 2000, an episode called Bart to the Future depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson had become the first female president of the United States. The scene establishing this premise included a reference to her predecessor in the Oval Office. That predecessor was identified as Donald Trump. The episode aired in the year 2000, 16 years before Trump's actual election victory. 16 years before a man who had been publicly discussing a potential presidential run since the late 1980s, who had appeared on the cover of Newsweek speculating about his political ambitions, who was widely understood within American cultural consciousness as a person who wanted to be president, actually became president. When it happened, screenshots from that episode went viral in a way that transcended the normal boundaries of television fandom. People who had not thought about The Simpsons in years were sharing the clips. The phrase, "The Simpsons predicted Trump," entered the cultural conversation and has never really left it. It became a meme that functions as shorthand for the general idea that this show has some kind of special insight into the direction of American life. The Trump prediction is the headline, but the list continues from there in directions that become increasingly specific and increasingly strange. In 1995, an episode depicted a wrist-mounted device that functions, in observable terms, very similarly to a modern smartwatch. In 1994, Homer goes to space alongside Buzz Aldrin in an episode that explores the growing commercialization of spaceflight, decades before commercial space tourism became a real and functioning industry. In 1998, Homer discovers a mathematical equation that, when examined by people who understand mathematics at a level the show did not expect anyone to examine it, appears to predict the mass of the Higgs boson particle. The actual experimental confirmation of the Higgs boson would not come until 2012. In 1999, Homer proposes a theory about the shape of the universe being toroidal donut-shaped, because of course he does, and years later, cosmologists examining radiation patterns found data suggesting the universe might actually have that kind of topological structure. In 1993, an episode called Marge in Chains depicted a flu virus originating from Asia spreading to Springfield, causing exactly the kinds of social responses that the world would experience in 2020. Panic buying, a frantic search for a cure, public figures making reassuring statements that were not reassuring. And during the chaos of the fictional outbreak, the townspeople accidentally released a swarm of bees, which resonated in an uncanny way when Asian giant hornets began appearing in the Pacific Northwest during the actual pandemic, and the media, with characteristic restraint, began calling them murder hornets. In 1996, an episode called Homer Palooza featured a joke about the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra while in an altered state. In 2024, 28 years later, Cypress Hill actually performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. Not as a joke, as a real, deliberate, ticketed event. In 1998, the show depicted Disney acquiring 20th Century Fox as a corporate satire about media consolidation. In 2019, Disney acquired 20th Century Fox. These are the most famous examples, but they represent only a fraction of the moments that have generated the prediction phenomenon. Video calling, autocorrect failures, surveillance culture, the specific aesthetics of particular future technologies. The show has, across its extraordinary run, depicted so many things that later became real that the accumulation has started to feel like something more than coincidence. The people who actually make the show have a simple explanation for all of it. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer since the earliest seasons, has addressed the prediction phenomenon directly and repeatedly. His answer is consistent. When you throw enough darts, you will hit some bullseyes. That is it. That is the explanation from inside the room. The Simpsons has produced somewhere in the vicinity of 800 episodes across 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, references, satirical observations, and speculative flights of imagination about technology, politics, culture, and the direction of American life. When you generate that volume of material over that duration of time, statistical probability alone will ensure that some portion of it aligns with things that later happen in the real world. It is not prediction. It is volume. Producer Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its peak seasons, put it in slightly different terms. Many of these apparent predictions, he argued, are not really predictions at all. They are observations about trends that were already in motion when the episodes were written. History has a tendency to repeat itself, and a show that has been running long enough will eventually see many of the patterns it observed the first time come around again. Fact-checking organizations have gone through the most popular claimed predictions systematically and found that most of them have fairly simple explanations. The Trump prediction did not require psychic ability. Trump had been publicly and explicitly flirting with a presidential run since the late 1980s. He had discussed it in interviews. He had appeared on covers of magazines with the question posed explicitly. The Simpsons writers did not have to imagine a future in which Trump ran for president. They had to look at the available evidence and extend the logical trajectory by one step. The Disney-Fox prediction did not require special insight into the future of media consolidation. Media consolidation was an accelerating trend that anyone paying attention to the entertainment industry in the 1990s could see. The joke was not that Disney would specifically buy Fox. The joke was that media consolidation would continue until everything was owned by a small number of enormous corporations. Disney buying Fox was one possible expression of a trend that was already visible. The show pointed at the trend and drew its conclusion to the absurd extreme, and then reality eventually caught up. The smartwatch prediction did not require knowledge of future technology. It required the observation, available to anyone looking at the trajectory of personal electronics in the 1990s, that technology was getting smaller and more personal and more integrated into daily life, and the extrapolation of that trend to its logical conclusion. The Simpsons writing staff has historically been extraordinarily well educated. Writers with degrees from Harvard, Yale, and other elite institutions. Writers with backgrounds in mathematics, computer science, political theory, and a range of other disciplines that give them frameworks for analyzing trends and extrapolating their trajectories. These are not people guessing randomly. They are intelligent, well-read observers of American culture who spend their professional lives paying careful attention to how things are going, and who are specifically tasked with pushing those observations to their absurd but internally coherent conclusions. The show did not predict the future. The show read the present more carefully than most of its audience did. But here is where the straightforward debunking stops being sufficient, because there is a category of Simpsons prediction that is not easily explained by trend extrapolation or statistical probability, and these are the cases that make even the skeptics pause. The Trump prediction specified Trump by name. It did not predict that a celebrity businessman might run for president. It predicted the specific celebrity businessman who actually did. And in the episode, there is a moment where Trump descends an escalator in a way that visually echoes, with uncomfortable precision, the actual announcement Trump made in 2015 at Trump Tower. The show did not just extrapolate a trend. It depicted a specific visual moment from a specific future event. The Siegfried and Roy episode did not predict that exotic animals were dangerous. Every person who has ever watched an animal documentary knows that exotic animals are dangerous. The episode depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers in a specific way that aligned closely with what happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers during a performance. These are not the broad strokes of trend extrapolation. These are specific details. The Cypress Hill collaboration is perhaps the strangest of all, because it is not a trend. There is no cultural trend that leads inexorably from hip-hop to classical orchestral performance collaboration. The joke in the episode is absurd specifically because the combination is absurd. And then the absurdity became real. 28 years later. And this is where the most interesting meta-theory enters the conversation. It does not invoke time travel. It does not invoke secret knowledge or conspiracy. It is stranger and more interesting than either of those things. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes the future, not through magic, through cultural influence. The show is one of the most watched, most quoted, most referenced, and most deeply embedded pieces of American media in the entire history of the medium. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its jokes have entered the American lexicon. Its characters have become universal cultural reference points that function in conversations across generations and demographic exits. Its observations about American life have become part of how Americans think about American life. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke does not disappear when the episode ends. It enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. It becomes something people reference, something people quote, something that shapes how people feel about the possibility they are witnessing. The joke does not predict the future. It makes the future feel familiar before it arrives. It primes the cultural imagination. It makes the idea feel less like a shocking impossibility and more like an inevitable punchline. And when the punchline materializes, it does not feel like a shock. It feels like recognition, like something you always knew was coming, even if you could not have told anyone why. The show did not make Trump president, but it may have made a Trump presidency feel to a significant portion of American cultural consciousness, like something that was already written somewhere, a foregone conclusion, something the culture had already processed and moved past. And that kind of cultural familiarity with an outcome changes how people respond to that outcome when it arrives. Springfield did not reflect America. At some point, America started to become Springfield. The show held up a mirror for long enough that people began to resemble what they saw. The incompetent government, the corrupt billionaire, the population too distracted by daily life to notice how badly they are being managed, the endless cycle of catastrophe, and reset. These were satirical observations when the show made them. They have become, in the decades since, increasingly accurate descriptions. The show just wrote them down first. And the final piece of the puzzle is the one that explains why the prediction phenomenon feels so overwhelming, even when you understand how it works. The Simpsons has also made thousands of predictions that did not come true. Jokes about jetpacks that never arrived. Political outcomes that went a different way. Cultural shifts that simply did not happen. These failed predictions exist in the archive. They are there if you look for them. But nobody screenshots them. Nobody shares them. Nobody builds viral posts about the time The Simpsons predicted something that never happened. Confirmation bias is one of the most powerful forces in human cognition, and the internet is the most efficient confirmation bias engine ever constructed. You remember the hits and forget the misses. You screenshot the predictions that came true and scroll past the ones that did not. And when you apply that filter to nearly 800 episodes worth of satirical content, you end up with a highlight reel that looks, from a distance, like prophecy. The predictions are not supernatural. They are the natural result of a brilliantly written show running for an impossible length of time, staffed by exceptionally educated observers of American culture, producing more content than any other show in television history, and then having that content filtered through human confirmation bias until only the accurate moments remain visible in popular memory. But here is the thing. Even knowing all of this, even understanding exactly how the mechanism works, even knowing that you are witnessing statistical probability and confirmation bias and cultural influence rather than genuine foresight, the next time a clip from a 1997 episode lines up with a headline from the current year, you will pause. You will look at the screenshot, and some part of you, the part that grew up watching this show, the part that knows these characters better than it knows some real people, will feel that familiar chill. The Simpsons wrote so many possible futures that some of them were bound to come true. And the ones that came true are the ones anyone remembers. The show knows this. The writers know this. And even they, occasionally, when a particularly precise prediction materializes, pause and exchange a look across the writer's room that probably contains more than they are willing to admit in any interview. Section 8. Mona Simpson, the conspiracy that connects everything. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the story. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, had told him so when Homer was young. He showed him a grave. Homer mourned. He grew up believing he was the kind of boy whose mother died when he needed her most, and whose father was too cold and distant and burdened by his own damage to fill the space she left behind. Homer Simpson's entire emotional architecture is built on that absence. His desperate need to be loved, his terror of abandonment, his compulsive need for approval from people who, in many cases, have given him no reason to expect it. His willingness to endure years of humiliation from an employer who cannot remember his name because the alternative, losing the job, losing the structure, losing one more thing, is worse than any indignity. Homer's personality is a coping mechanism for a wound. And the wound was a lie. Season 7, Episode 7, Mother Simpson. It aired on the 19th of November, 1995. It is widely considered one of the greatest episodes in the series' history, and once you know what it contains, that reputation makes complete sense. Homer fakes his own death to avoid working on a Saturday, in a manner so characteristically Homer that describing it feels almost redundant, and the resulting confusion leads Marge to insist he go to the Hall of Records and correct the official record. When Homer arrives, he discovers something that rearranges his understanding of his entire life. According to municipal records, his mother is alive. She never died. The grave Abe showed him belonged not to his mother but to Walt Whitman, the poet, whose headstone Abe had been using as a proxy for his wife's burial site for Homer's entire childhood. Homer finds his mother Mona at a cemetery, where she has been visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She does not recognize him at first. He has changed too much. But when Homer proves who he is, they have a reunion that is, even by the show's highest emotional standards, genuinely devastating. A grown man and his mother. 30 years of separation compressed into a scene that does not play for jokes. It just plays for truth. And then Mona tells him why she left. She did not die. She did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she had to. Because staying would have put Homer and Abe in danger. Because the man who would eventually employ Homer for his entire adult life had destroyed her life and forced her underground. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife. She was married to Abe. She had a young son named Homer. She was living what the show depicts as an ordinary, unremarkable life in Springfield, in the years when the world outside was burning through a particular kind of upheaval: the civil rights movement, the counterculture, the growing opposition to the Vietnam War. These were not abstractions to people living through them. They were the texture of daily life. And Mona was radicalized. The show depicts this with its characteristic blend of absurdity and genuine emotional seriousness. She joined a group of activists. The show calls them hippies, which, in the context of 1969 Springfield, means something specific. People who had decided that the gap between what the country claimed to be and what it actually was had become too wide to ignore. And the specific injustice they targeted was not a metaphor or a satirical stand-in for something vague. It was a biological weapons laboratory, owned by Mr. Burns. Let that land, because this is one of the most important revelations the show has ever delivered, and it tends to be remembered primarily as backstory for Homer's family drama, rather than as what it actually is: confirmation that Mr. Burns has been engaged in activities that go well beyond tax evasion and environmental negligence. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant with 342 safety violations. He owned a facility designed to produce weaponized biological agents. In Springfield, in the same community where children were growing up, where families were living, where the man he would later employ as his nuclear safety inspector was spending his childhood. Mona and her group broke into the laboratory. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, a device designed not to kill but to neutralize the biological agents stored inside the facility. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the security guard, who turned out to be a young Clancy Wiggum, the same man who would later spend decades as Springfield's chief of police, presiding over the resolution of the very case that Mona's actions set in motion. The raid succeeded. The biological agents were destroyed, but Mona made a single critical mistake as the group fled. She stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the chaos. That someone was Burns. She stopped to help the man whose weapons she had just destroyed. She helped him up. He saw her face. He committed it to memory with the precision of someone who has had a very long time to practice holding grudges. He reported her to the FBI. And from that moment, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not hold her son or explain to him why she was leaving, or tell him that the absence he would spend his life interpreting as evidence of his own unworthiness was actually, in its deepest structure, evidence of love. She had to leave to protect him. She kissed him goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared. Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead. And Homer spent the next 3 decades of his life carrying that absence as a wound, never knowing that the wound had been deliberately inflicted, never knowing that the man who signed his paychecks was the same man who had put his mother underground. Because here is the conspiracy that the show builds quietly across this and several subsequent episodes. Burns did not just identify Mona to the FBI and move on. He maintained active pursuit. He used his resources and his connections to ensure she could never come home. When Mona finally returns to Springfield in the Season 7 episode when she and Homer are reunited and beginning, tentatively, to reconstruct something from the ruins of 30 lost years, Burns sees her through a cab window, recognizes her, calls the authorities. The FBI arrives. Mona has to run again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time. And this time he knows why she is leaving. He knows who is forcing her out. He knows that the man in the large house on the hill, the man who has employed him for his entire working life, is the reason his mother has been living underground since 1969. He knows that the same billionaire who cannot remember his employee's name took that employee's mother away when the employee was 6 years old and has been making sure she stayed away ever since. And Homer does not connect the dots. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not appear to fully process, in any lasting or actionable way, the relationship between the man who writes his checks and the man who stole his childhood. The show does not play this for comedy. It plays it as tragedy, because Homer Simpson is not capable of making connections like that. His brain, damaged by the crayon and by the radiation and by decades of cognitive erosion, does not work that way. The architecture of his own suffering is invisible to him. He can feel the pain, he has always felt the pain, but he cannot trace it back to its source. And this is where the conspiracy becomes something structural, something that extends beyond one man's personal grudge against one woman's activism. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life. He engineered Homer's. By driving Mona away when Homer was a child, Burns ensured that Homer would grow up emotionally damaged in specific and exploitable ways. Desperate for approval, incapable of challenging authority, terrified of abandonment, grateful for whatever scraps of stability were available, because instability felt worse than any job, any indignity, any amount of being forgotten or dismissed or used. The perfect employee, a man who would spend his entire career at a dangerous facility in direct proximity to an active reactor without seriously questioning it. A man who would absorb humiliation after humiliation from his employer Burns's inability to remember his name being only the most consistently depicted of these because the alternative was to leave, and leaving meant losing the one structure that kept his world from collapsing entirely. Burns did not hire Homer because Homer was the best available candidate for the role of nuclear safety inspector. Burns hired Homer because Homer was the best available mechanism for ensuring that safety inspection never actually happened. The show confirms this architecture in a later revelation. Burns, at some earlier point, had committed an act that Grandpa Abe witnessed. We are not given full details of what the act was, but it was significant enough that Abe had real leverage over Burns when he discovered it. Rather than use that leverage to expose Burns, Abe made a deal. Burns would guarantee Homer's employment at the plant. No matter what Homer did, no matter how many mistakes he made, no matter how many documented errors accumulated on his record, and the number eventually cited is 742, Homer would never be permanently terminated. In exchange, Abe stayed quiet. Homer's job security, which the show had depicted for years as a running joke about an incompetent man at a job he was clearly unsuited for, was not a cartoon convenience. It was a contractual obligation. Homer was employed not despite his incompetence but because of a private agreement between his father and his mother's persecutor, negotiated in secret and maintained in silence, and never explained to Homer because explaining it would require explaining everything else. Mona was a radical who fought against a billionaire's biological weapons program. The billionaire retaliated by destroying her family. Her husband covered the truth and made a deal with the enemy. Her son grew up believing he was unloved, became cognitively impaired through a combination of environmental contamination and physical brain damage, and spent his entire adult life working for the man who took his mother away. 3 generations of the Simpson family, broken by one man's grudge. Mona Simpson died in a later season. The death scene is one of the show's most quietly devastating moments. Homer is beside her. He holds her hand. He watches his mother, the woman he spent 30 years believing was dead, the woman he found and lost and found again, slip away for the last time. There is no joke. There is no cutaway. Just a man and his mother and 37 years of stolen time pressing down on the space between them. Burns won. He wins every time. Because in Springfield, the man with the money and the grudge and the willingness to wait writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson works at the power plant until he dies. Because his grandfather made a deal. Because his mother made a choice. Because the richest man in town needed a broken man in Sector 7G. And Homer was broken before he ever clocked in. Section 9. Where is Springfield? The geography of deliberate impossibility. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More Americans can name Springfield than can name the capital cities of half the actual states in the Union. Its nuclear power plant, its tire fire, its mysteriously persistent gorge, its school, its prison, its quick E-Mart. These are images embedded in the cultural memory of generations of viewers who have been watching this town for their entire lives. And nobody knows where it is. This is not a simple oversight. The show has not simply failed to specify a location. It has, across 36 seasons and hundreds of episodes, actively and systematically prevented Springfield from being pinned down. Every clue that appears to narrow the possibilities is matched, eventually, by a contradictory clue in a different episode. Every confirmation is followed by a denial. Every apparent answer generates a new set of inconsistencies. The mystery of Springfield's location is not an unsolved puzzle. It is a puzzle that was specifically designed to be unsolvable. Let us trace the geography. Springfield has coastline. It has mountain ranges visible from the town. It has deserts accessible within a day's drive. It has forests. It has farmland. It has something recognizable as heartland American terrain coexisting with something recognizable as coastal American terrain, coexisting with something recognizable as Southern American terrain, all within the boundaries of a single town that could plausibly be reached from all of these things in the time it takes Homer to drive somewhere and back. No real American town has this combination of geographic features. The physical impossibility of Springfield's landscape is not a matter of cartographic error or authorial carelessness. It is a deliberate, sustained, carefully maintained impossibility. The state boundaries are equally unstable. Various episodes have placed Springfield adjacent to Ohio, adjacent to Nevada, adjacent to Maine, adjacent to Kentucky. The town has been depicted in geographic relation to features that cannot simultaneously exist in any single American state. Lisa's area code appears in one episode as a Missouri code. The state abbreviation shown in another episode is NT, which is not a real American state designation. When Homer once called the state capital, the voice on the other end of the line identifies the state as beginning with a vowel, which eliminates some possibilities while leaving dozens of others open. Matt Groening, the show's creator, appeared to solve this mystery in 2012. In an interview with Smithsonian Magazine, he said he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, and that he chose the name Springfield because it is one of the most common city names in America, and because he grew up near the real Springfield in Oregon. He was being charming and candid about the show's origins, and for approximately 48 hours, the internet treated this as the definitive answer. Springfield was in Oregon, mystery solved. Then the show continued. Episodes that aired after the interview placed Springfield in geographic contexts impossible to reconcile with Oregon. The writers did not honor Groening's confession. They kept the contradictions coming because the contradictions were never going to stop. Groening named the inspiration. He did not name the location. And the show's location was never meant to be named. The surface explanation for all of this is the one the show itself has offered when pressed. Springfield is universal. It is every American town. It was designed from the beginning to feel familiar to every viewer, regardless of their actual geography, to contain enough of every American regional experience that, no matter where you grew up, some piece of Springfield would feel like home to you. The show is set everywhere so that it can belong to everyone. This is true. The writers have confirmed it. Groening has confirmed it. It is an intentional design philosophy that has worked exactly as intended for 36 years. Springfield feels like your town because it was built to feel like everyone's town. But the deeper theories we have been tracing through this entire video suggest something else operating alongside that intention. Something more specific and considerably darker. If the radiation theory is correct, if Springfield is a contamination zone where the normal rules of biology have been suspended by decades of nuclear exposure, there is no particular reason why the warping should stop at biology. If the people of Springfield can have 4 fingers and yellow skin and survive injuries that would destroy any normal human being, why should the landscape itself obey normal American geography? If the contamination can change what a person is, perhaps it can change what a place is. Perhaps the radiation has done something to the spatial logic of Springfield itself. compressing geographic features that should be separated by hundreds of miles into a single impossible region, creating a territory that does not behave the way territories are supposed to behave. The coma theory offers a different and more emotionally resonant explanation. Homer's unconscious mind, which we have argued is the engine generating everything that happens in Springfield after 1993, does not contain a precise map of America. It contains impressions, emotional memories, fragments of every place Homer has ever seen or visited or watched on television. Mountains from a vacation, oceans from a commercial, deserts from a movie, the flat middle distance of the American Midwest seen through the window of a car on a long drive. Homer's dreaming brain assembled Springfield from all of these fragments, layering them on top of each other without any concern for geographic logic, because dreams do not operate through geographic logic. They operate through emotional logic. They assemble the landscape from what was felt rather than what was seen. Springfield feels like America because it is made from Homer's memory of America, which is scattered and incomplete and held together by longing rather than topography. And the principle and the pauper theory, the theory that Springfield operates through collective denial, that the town maintains its impossible reality through an ongoing social contract of not noticing, suggests the darkest reading of all. Springfield's geographic uncertainty is not just a comedy device. It is a legal shield. A town with no fixed location has no fixed regulatory authority, no consistent EPA jurisdiction, no permanent state attorney general with the mandate to investigate its nuclear facility, no reliable mechanism for federal oversight of any kind. The power plant is in violation of hundreds of safety regulations. It has been contaminating the local environment for decades. There are human skeletons in the basement. The fish have 3 eyes. And the agency with the authority to do something about any of this would have to be able to find Springfield on a map before it could begin the investigation. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means accountability. Landing means someone with a badge and a mandate shows up and starts asking questions about what exactly has been happening here, and for how long, and who knew about it. Springfield's geographic instability is not an artistic choice or a production shortcut. Within the logic of the show's own universe, it is the most effective defense against external oversight that a polluting billionaire could possibly construct. There is a moment in the episode Behind the Laughter, the season 12 mockumentary about the Simpsons family, where Springfield's location is definitively identified, or appears to be. In the original broadcast, the family is described as being from northern Kentucky. The episode appeared to settle the question once and for all. And then, in syndicated reruns, the location was quietly changed, a different state. The answer, in the version of the episode that most people later saw, was different from the answer in the version of the episode that originally aired. The show gave you the truth and then changed the truth depending on which broadcast you were watching. Even when Springfield has a definitive answer, the answer is not definitive. It shifts, it mutates. It refuses to stay fixed, just like everything else in this town. Every American state has, at some point, been theorized as Springfield's home. Every theory has evidence that supports it, and evidence that contradicts it. The show has maintained this state of permanent ambiguity with such consistency that the ambiguity itself has become the most reliable fact about the town. Springfield will never be found. Not because the show cannot make a decision, but because the show made its real decision a very long time ago. Springfield is more useful as a mystery than as an answer. A town that could be anywhere belongs to everyone. And a town that belongs to everyone cannot be shut down. Number section 10. The floating timeline. Why nobody in Springfield ages, and what that means for all of us. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons debuted on the 17th of December 1989. As of the show's current season, Bart Simpson is 10 years old. Lisa was 8 then, she is 8 now. Maggie was 1, she is 1. Homer and Marge were somewhere in their mid-30s, they still are. 36 years have passed in the real world, 0 years have passed in Springfield. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. It means the show's present is always the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025. When an episode aired in 1995, the characters were living in 1995. The technology changes, the cultural references change, the world outside the window of 742 Evergreen Terrace changes continuously. But the characters inside the house remain exactly as they were. They exist in a state of permanent temporal suspension. The year moves around them. They do not move with it. Every long-running animated series does something like this. The Simpsons is not unique in employing a floating timeline, but The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has generated contradictions so large and so structurally strange that they have started to crack the foundation of the show's internal reality. Consider Homer and Marge's backstory. When the show began in the late 1980s, their courtship and early marriage were depicted as taking place in the late 1970s and early 1980s. This made complete sense for two people who were in their mid-30s at the time of the show's debut. Their high school years were anchored to a specific era, complete with era-appropriate fashion, music, and cultural context. Their love story belonged to a particular moment in American life. But the floating timeline kept pulling the present forward. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they did not meet in 1980. They met sometime in the early 2000s, which means their high school experience was not shaped by Watergate and disco. It was shaped by MySpace and the early internet and the particular aesthetic of the 2000s. The show has reflected this shift explicitly. Flashback episodes that revisit Homer and Marge's formative years have been quietly updated. Their youth was set in the 1970s in early episodes, then the 1990s, then the 2000s. The love story is the same, the characters are the same, but the era where they met keeps sliding forward, rewritten every few years to maintain the arithmetic of a permanent present. Homer and Marge do not have a fixed past. Their history is a draft that keeps being revised. Their memories are unstable. Their origin story exists in a state of perpetual approximation. They know the broad outlines of who they were and when they met and how they got to Evergreen Terrace, but the specific cultural context of those memories keeps changing around them. Now apply the theories. Every theory we have traced through this entire video converges on this point. They arrive at the same conclusion through different paths. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man who cannot imagine his children growing older because he is not there to watch it happen. The radiation theory says nobody ages because their biology has been fundamentally altered at the cellular level by decades of exposure, and whatever mutation has changed the color of their skin and the shape of their eyes has also, somehow, affected the normal progression of aging. The principal and the pauper theory says nobody ages because Springfield has collectively agreed to ignore any truth that disrupts the status quo, and aging the most disruptive truth of all, the truth that ends everything eventually is simply another inconvenient fact the town has voted not to acknowledge. The Burns immortality theory says that if one person in Springfield has found a way to cheat death through technology and wealth, then the very concept of aging is already negotiable in this universe, and other residents might be operating under similar, if less explicitly maintained, conditions. All of these theories are saying the same thing in different registers. Time does not work in Springfield. Something has broken the normal flow of time for everyone who lives there. And the floating timeline is not a production convenience papering over this break. The floating timeline is the symptom. It is the show telling you, week after week, decade after decade, that these characters are not moving forward. They are cycling. They are trapped in a loop that has been running since 1989. And the loop is not an accident. The loop is the point. The show has imagined what it would look like if time worked normally in Springfield. It has done this several times. The Season 6 episode, Lisa's Wedding, is the most famous and most emotionally rich example. The episode flashes forward roughly 15 years to show Lisa as a young woman in her early 20s. She is engaged to be married. She has become, in broad outline, exactly who the show has always suggested she would become: intelligent and principled and searching for connection in a world that does not quite know what to do with someone like her. The episode depicts her future with specificity and emotional depth. It is one of the show's warmest and most affecting half hours. And then it ends. Lisa returns to being 8 years old. The future closes. The permanent present resumes as if the glimpse had not occurred. The show can imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. The flash forward is a single episode, a what if, a door that opens and then shuts before anything can come through it. This refusal is not arbitrary. The show understands, at the level of its own deepest logic, what allowing the characters to age would mean. It would mean the show ending, and the show cannot end. Not because the network will not allow it or the ratings do not justify it, but because the show ending means something that the audience is not ready to face. It means admitting that the version of America The Simpsons represents the messy, chaotic, dysfunctional, fundamentally optimistic version of the middle-class American family was always temporary, was always fragile, was always just one birthday away from becoming something unrecognizable. Homer must always be middle-aged. Marge must always be patient. Bart must always be rebellious. Lisa must always be idealistic. Maggie must always be silent. The moment any of these characters grows beyond those definitions, the thing the show is actually about, the thing underneath all the jokes and theories and contradictions, becomes visible. And the thing it is actually about is the passage of time, and what the passage of time costs, and the human need to believe that some things are permanent even when nothing is. The Simpsons are frozen in time because we need them to be. They represent something we cannot afford to let go of. The version of the American family that can survive anything, that recovers from everything, that resets after every disaster, and is back on the couch together by the end of the episode. We built that. We have maintained it for 36 years. We tune in every week to confirm that the walls are still standing, and the family is still intact, and the timeline is still floating. Because if the timeline lands, if Bart turns 11 and Lisa moves to another city, and Maggie says her second word, and Homer retires and Marge is left in that house with the photographs, then the show becomes something we did not sign up for. It becomes an elegy. It becomes the story of a family that ran out of time. And America, which has been watching these people for its entire modern cultural life, is not ready for that story. Maybe it will never be ready. Maybe that is why the loop keeps running. Not because the writers are lazy, or the network is greedy, or anyone in the production has lost their way, but because every single time the audience sits down on Sunday night and watches the couch gag and hears that opening theme, they are casting a vote. Keep them young. Keep them here. Keep the beer cold and the kids in the yard and the couch warm and the light on. The floating timeline is not the show's thesis, it is ours. We pressed pause in 1989, and we never pressed play. And now here we are, 36 years later, watching the same family in the same house on the same street, waiting for something to change and not quite wanting it to, because we know what change means. Change means growing up, and growing up means the couch you sat on as a kid, watching the opening credits for the first time, is gone now. It is in a storage unit or a landfill or a different house belonging to someone you do not know. And the kid who sat on it is gone too, in the way that children are always going, not dying, just becoming someone else. As long as The Simpsons is on, as long as the loop keeps floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is stumbling through the door at 5:30 after another day at the plant, we do not have to admit any of that. We can sit down on whatever couch we have now, and we can go home. To Evergreen Terrace, to Springfield, to the family that never changes in the town that never ages in the show that never ends. The loop is not their prison. It is ours. We built it, and we choose every Sunday to stay inside it. Number Section 11. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and the darkest corners of Springfield. There are two characters in The Simpsons who have never been given the full theoretical treatment they deserve. One of them is the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation, and the other is, by any serious measure, the saddest person in Springfield. They are not the characters you would choose to examine if you were trying to tell a story about the show's darkness. That is part of why looking at them closely is so rewarding. We will start with Hans Moleman. If you have watched The Simpsons for any length of time, you know Hans Moleman. He is small. He is elderly in appearance. He wears thick glasses and moves through Springfield with the resigned shuffle of someone who has long since stopped being surprised by the things that happen to him. He appears in the background of scenes. He occupies the margins of Springfield in the way that certain types of people occupy the margins of real cities present everywhere, noticed by almost nobody, remembered only when something happens to them. Things happen to Hans Moleman constantly. Things happen to him and they are lethal. He is struck by cars. He is crushed by objects falling from heights. He is attacked by animals. He is buried alive. He falls into things. He is struck by lightning. He is incinerated, in at least one canonical moment, in a way that leaves nothing. He drowns. He is consumed by the earth. By any honest count of canonical episodes, Hans Moleman has died dozens of times in situations that were not dream sequences, not Treehouse of Horror episodes, not Elseworld scenarios. They were regular episodes of The Simpsons, depicting the regular world of Springfield, in which a small elderly man died in a variety of ways, and then appeared, fully reconstituted, in the next episode. The show treats this as a running gag. Mole Man dies a lot. He comes back. It is funny in the specific register of absurdist repetition that the show has always deployed well, and the audience laughs and files it away and moves on. But under the framework of the theories we have been working through, Mole Man's repeated deaths are genuinely strange. If the radiation theory is correct, Mole Man could represent the most extreme known mutation in Springfield. Not in the direction of increased intelligence, like Maggie, and not in the direction of reduced cognition, like Homer, but in the direction of something almost metaphysical. A man whose biology has been so profoundly altered by whatever has been seeping out of that plant for decades that his body can, apparently, reconstitute itself after what should be fatal damage. Homer endures injuries and heals. That is impressive but comprehensible within the framework of enhanced biological resilience. Mole Man does not endure injuries and heal. He dies. His body ceases to function. And then, in the next episode, he is back, apparently none the worse for having been, several episodes earlier, definitively dead. If the radiation theory holds, Mole Man represents the outer limit of what chronic nuclear exposure can do to a biological system. Not just enhanced healing, not just altered cognition, or altered physical structure, actual biological reset. Death as a temporary condition rather than a permanent state. Whatever the plant's contamination has done to Mole Man over the course of what appears to have been a very long time in Springfield, it has done something to his relationship with mortality that no other character demonstrates to the same degree. There is one additional canonical detail about Mole Man that deserves to sit with you for a moment. In one episode, he states his age. He says he is 31 years old. Look at Hans Mole Man. He does not look 31 by any standard of biological aging. He appears to be in his 80s, possibly older. He has the physical bearing, the gait, the general presentation of a man who has been alive for 8 decades or more. If he is telling the truth and there is nothing in the episode to suggest this is a joke at his expense, rather than a genuine biographical detail, then something aged him catastrophically. Something took a man who was 31 years old and turned him into the physical semblance of someone decades older in a way that goes well beyond normal aging. The radiation theory has an obvious candidate for what that something might be. A man who has been living near a leaking nuclear facility for long enough, and who may have had particularly acute exposure, closer proximity, or a specific biological sensitivity, or any number of variables that radiation exposure studies have demonstrated can cause dramatically accelerated physical aging in affected individuals. Mole Man is what happens when the contamination goes to the extreme in one specific direction. He looks ancient. He is young. He dies constantly and keeps coming back. And nobody in Springfield finds any of this worth commenting on because Springfield has agreed, in its unspoken collective way, not to comment on things like this. The coma theory offers a different and somewhat more unsettling reading. If everything since 1993 is Homer's dream, then Mole Man is a minor character in that dream, a background presence, a piece of furniture for the dream town of Springfield. And Homer's unconscious mind, which does not particularly care about Mole Man's continued existence in the way it cares intensely about Marge and the kids, occasionally lets him lapse. The dream kills Mole Man because the dream does not need him to survive. And then, when the next scene requires a small elderly man in the background near the Quickie Mart, the dream reassembles him, not because there is any narrative logic to his return, but because the dream needs a certain density of minor characters to feel like a town rather than an empty set. Mole Man is not a person in this reading. He is a prop. He is Springfield furniture. He gets broken and he gets put back together and nobody remarks on it, because that is the nature of furniture in a dream. You do not mourn the chair you sat on yesterday when you discover it sitting perfectly intact in the same spot today. The collective denial reading is perhaps the most simply disturbing. A man dies in public, in front of witnesses. He has been dying in public, in front of witnesses, for decades, and nobody investigates. Nobody calls the appropriate authorities. Nobody asks how he keeps coming back. The town has normalized Mole Man's death cycle, the way it has normalized everything else that should prompt immediate and serious inquiry. He dies, and Springfield shrugs, and life goes on. This is what the denial mechanism looks like when it is applied to something this direct and this visible. Not a buried environmental contamination, not a corporate corruption, not a missing mother or a stolen identity. A man who visibly dies, on camera, in front of the community, and then reappears. And Springfield's response is to not notice, to treat it as background noise, to file it away in the category of things that happen in Springfield that we do not discuss. Now let us talk about Ned Flanders. Because Ned Flanders deserves to be taken seriously in a way the show has never fully allowed. On the surface, Ned is everything Homer is not. He is kind, reliably and consistently kind, in a way that Homer cannot manage even on his best days. He is devoutly religious, genuinely so rather than performatively. He is financially responsible. He is physically fit. He is a good father to Rod and Todd, and he maintains that quality of fathering under conditions that would break most parents. He is a good neighbor to Homer even when Homer gives him every reason not to be. He is, by any objective measure available to this show, a better person than Homer Simpson in almost every respect. And the show punishes him for it. His first wife, Maude, was killed by a misfired t-shirt cannon at the Springfield Speedway during a NASCAR race. Homer was the reason the t-shirts were being fired in that direction. Homer, who was dodging the projectiles on his side of the stands, sent them toward Maude's position. The t-shirts hit her. She fell from the bleachers. She died. Homer's reflexive self-preservation, applied at the wrong moment in the wrong place, literally killed his neighbor's wife. Ned forgave him, because that is what Ned does. He forgives. He turns the other cheek. He absorbs punishment and responds with grace and patience, and a faith that the suffering has meaning, that there is a plan, that goodness is its own reward even when the evidence is strongly suggesting otherwise. But there was a Season 9 episode, the Hurricane episode, the one that most clearly shows you what Ned actually is underneath the performance of patient faith that changed the way this character could be read. A hurricane destroys Ned's house. The community rallies to rebuild it. They do a poor job. The rebuilt house is structurally unsound and collapses almost immediately. And Ned, who has been enduring things quietly for years, cracks. He has a complete psychological breakdown in public, in front of the entire community, and the things he says are not the things of a man who is simply angry about a bad construction job. They are the things of a man who has been holding back a torrent for so long that when the dam finally breaks, what comes out is not ordinary frustration. It is something that has been accumulating for years, possibly decades, under tremendous pressure. He is institutionalized. He goes to a mental health facility, and what the facility reveals about Ned Flanders is one of the most retroactively transformative revelations in the show's history. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child. His parents, being committed non-interventionists who did not believe in discipline, took him to a psychiatrist. That psychiatrist spent years using what the show describes as behavioral modification to condition the aggression out of Ned, to suppress it, to reroute it, to replace the child who expressed his inner states violently with a version of Ned who expressed them through patience and kindness and an unwavering positive attitude. Ned's kindness is not a character trait. It is a psychological cage. It is the end product of years of intervention designed to make a feral child into a socially acceptable one, performed at an age when Ned was too young to consent to it and too young to understand what was being done to him. The person he appears to be is not the person he is. It is the person he was made into, and the person underneath the person who was there before the conditioning, the person who is still there underneath all of it, contained by years of behavioral modification, but not destroyed, emerged during that hurricane breakdown. And what emerged was genuinely alarming, not because Ned became violent, though the show hints at that potential, but because the despair that came out of him was bottomless. The specific despair of someone who has spent an entire lifetime performing goodness and receiving, in return, an experience of the world that does not suggest goodness is being rewarded. His faith is the most interesting and most heartbreaking element of this portrait. Ned believes, not casually, not performatively. He believes with an intensity that structures his entire existence. He organizes his life around a relationship with God that he treats as real, active, and personally meaningful. He goes to church. He prays, he studies scripture, he talks to God in the specific, direct, personal way of someone who genuinely expects the conversation to be reciprocal. And in the show's own internal continuity, God exists. This is not ambiguous. God has appeared in The Simpsons as a character. God has spoken to Homer, directly, casually. God has engaged with Homer in conversation on multiple occasions. in ways that establish God as a real and accessible presence within the show's universe. God talks to Homer. God does not talk to Ned. The drunk who falls asleep in church gets divine conversation. The man who has dedicated his entire life to faith, who has structured his existence around the relationship, who has maintained his belief through the death of his wife and the destruction of his house, and decades of thankless generosity toward a neighbor who does not deserve it, gets silence. This is the show's most devastating theological statement, not a dramatic one, not announced with fanfare or framed as a crisis of faith episode. Just the quiet, consistent, sustained depiction of a devout man being ignored by the God he serves, while the man who barely acknowledges that God's existence is the one who gets the conversations. Ned Flanders is not a comic foil. He is not a one-note caricature of religious observance. He is the show's most complete portrait of a specific kind of human tragedy, the tragedy of doing everything right in a system that does not reward rightness, and of discovering, too late and too completely, that the rules you followed were not the rules the system was actually running on. Homer Simpson is what happens when you do everything wrong in a system that does not punish wrongness. Ned Flanders is what happens when you do everything right in a system that does not reward it. They have lived side by side for 36 years, separated by a property line and an almost incomprehensible moral distance. And the gap between them has never closed, because in Springfield the gap is structural. It was built into the system from the beginning. The system keeps Homer at the plant, it keeps Ned at the church, it keeps Burns at the top, it keeps Molman in the ground and out of it and back in again. It keeps everyone exactly where they are, in roles that were assigned before any of them were given a chance to choose, in a loop that has been running for longer than most of its characters have been aware of. That is Springfield. Not the quirky animated backdrop to a long-running comedy, a system. A closed, self-sustaining, deliberately maintained system of radiation and denial and institutional corruption and collective amnesia, with a man in a hospital bed at the center of it dreaming about a couch and a family, and a billionaire at the top of it manufacturing the conditions that keep everyone below him exactly where he needs them. Every mystery connects. Every theory touches every other theory. Every dark corner of the show leads, eventually, back to the same central facts. The plant is real. The radiation is real. The damage is real. The denial is real. And the family on the couch, Homer falling asleep, Marge watching television with one eye on the room, Bart and Lisa arguing about something that will be forgotten by next week, Maggie sitting in the corner, watching, waiting, saying nothing is real. Whatever real means in Springfield, which is, after everything, the last and most unanswerable question the show leaves you with. Is any of it real? The coma says no. The radiation says yes, but altered. The denial mechanism says it does not matter, because Springfield has voted on reality and the vote is final and the dissenting voices have been tied to trains. And somewhere in there, beneath all the theories and the evidence and the decades of dark material the show has been accumulating, is the simplest and most honest reason any of us still watches. We grew up with these people. We know them. We have spent more cumulative hours with this family than we have spent with some of our actual family members. Homer and Marge are as familiar to us as our own parents were at certain ages. Bart and Lisa are as present in our cultural memory as our own childhood friendships. We cannot let them go because they are already part of us. We press play every week and return to Springfield, not despite what we know about it, but somehow because of it. Because there is something in the darkness of these theories that is also something honest. Something that captures, in its exaggerated and animated way, the actual texture of living in a place and a family and a time that is imperfect in ways you cannot always name. The yellow skin and the 4 fingers and the leaking reactor and the dreaming man and the billionaire who will not die, these are not just cartoon conventions. They are the show's way of saying something true, something about how damage is inherited, about how systems perpetuate themselves by making their victims unable to see them clearly, about how love survives anyway, underneath all of it, in the house on Evergreen Terrace, in the family that resets every Sunday. The loop is not just Homer's prison, and it is not just ours. It is also, in some strange and irreducible way, the container that holds the most honest portrait of the American family that television has ever attempted. Messy and broken and sometimes poisoned, and sometimes dreaming, and always, always, stubbornly, impossibly still there. Still on the couch, still watching television, still together. Number extended deep dive. The nuclear contamination. Every layer of the evidence. We spent time earlier with the broad strokes of the nuclear contamination theory, but the theory deserves more than broad strokes. It deserves the kind of sustained, methodical examination that the evidence actually supports. Because the more carefully you read the show through this lens, the more the evidence stops feeling like a theory and starts feeling like something the show has been telling you plainly for 36 years, in a voice just slightly below the register that triggers conscious notice. Let us go back through the evidence with more attention to detail. The plant safety violations are worth cataloging more carefully than a simple count of 342 allows. The violations are not all the same kind of violation. There are structural violations. The cracked cooling towers patched with chewing gum are the most visible, but the show has depicted other structural failures that represent direct pathways for radioactive material to escape the containment it is supposed to remain inside. Cooling towers exist for a specific engineering purpose. They transfer heat from the reactor's coolant system to the atmosphere through a controlled process. When they crack, the controlled process becomes an uncontrolled one. Material that should remain inside begins migrating outside. In a properly functioning facility, even a minor crack in a cooling tower triggers an immediate shutdown protocol and emergency repair procedure. In the Springfield plant, it was patched with a wad of chewing gum, and the facility continued operating. There are operational violations including, most damagingly, the systematic disposal of radioactive waste in ways that guarantee environmental contamination. Radioactive waste dumped directly into bodies of water does not stay where it was dumped. Water moves. Water carries particles. Water seeps into soil and feeds into other bodies of water and eventually makes its way through every natural system it contacts. The fish downstream have 3 eyes because the contamination traveled downstream. The contamination traveled downstream because someone at the plant decided that proper disposal of radioactive waste was an expense not worth incurring when the river was right there. There are personnel violations. Homer's continued employment is the most dramatic, but the show has established repeatedly that the plant's workforce is broadly characterized by the same kind of negligent incompetence that Homer embodies in its most extreme form. The culture of the plant is not one in which safety is taken seriously, or safety protocols are followed, or anyone in a position of responsibility makes any particular effort to understand what they are responsible for. This is a workplace culture that comes from the top. Burns does not hire people who might threaten his arrangement. He hires people who will not. The pattern of contamination in Springfield maps onto what environmental scientists and public health researchers have documented in real communities near real nuclear facilities. The health effects of chronic low-level radiation exposure are subtle enough, initially, that they can be attributed to any number of other causes. Cancer rates rise, but cancer has many causes. Developmental anomalies in children become more common, but developmental anomalies have many causes. Cognitive impairment accumulates across a population, but cognitive impairment has many causes. The pattern becomes visible when you look at the whole picture, not any individual data point. And in Springfield, the whole picture is the yellow skin and the 4 fingers and the bulging eyes and the overbites and the IQ that seems to have a population-wide ceiling that sits significantly below what you would expect from a random sample of Americans. The specific detail of the 4 fingers deserves more attention than it usually receives. In the real world, polydactyly, the condition of having more than 5 fingers on a hand, occurs in some populations. Oligodactyly, having fewer than 5 fingers, is rarer and typically associated with specific genetic conditions or developmental disruptions during fetal development. The entire population of Springfield having 4 fingers on each hand is not explained by genetics alone. It is not a trait that could have spread through a population through normal reproductive patterns in the time Springfield has existed. For 4-fingered hands to be universal across Springfield's entire population, something environmental would have to be acting on fetal development consistently enough to produce this result in essentially every individual born in the town. Radiation exposure during fetal development is one of the most well-documented causes of developmental anomalies, including limb malformation. The research on populations near nuclear facilities, particularly those exposed to significant contamination events, consistently finds elevated rates of developmental anomalies in children born in the affected areas in the years following the exposure. Springfield's population does not just show elevated rates of developmental anomalies, it shows universal rates. Every resident of Springfield has 4 fingers. Every one of them. Now consider that Burns knows the biology of radiation exposure better than anyone in Springfield, because Burns has been managing the biology of radiation exposure in his own body for longer than anyone else in Springfield has been alive. He understands what chronic radiation exposure does to an organism. He has seen it in his own blood work, his own tissue samples, his own weekly assessment by whatever private physicians maintain his treatment regimen. He knows the mechanisms. He knows the timelines. He knows the markers. And he has been watching Springfield's population display those markers for decades, and he has said nothing, because saying something would require acknowledging the cause, and acknowledging the cause would require shutting down the plant, and shutting down the plant would mean losing the monopoly on Springfield's power supply that makes him the economic sovereign of the entire town. The economics of this are important. The plant does not just provide Burns with profit, it provides Burns with control. Every institution in Springfield that depends on electrical power depends on Burns. Every business, every hospital, every school, every home. If Burns turns off the plant, Springfield goes dark. And Burns knows this, and Springfield knows this. And the knowledge functions as a veto on any action that might threaten Burns's ownership and operation of the facility. This is why the gubernatorial candidate who tried to use Blinky the three-eyed fish as evidence against Burns was unsuccessful. Not because the evidence was insufficient. The evidence was a literal three-eyed fish pulled from a river downstream of a nuclear plant. The evidence was about as direct and visible as environmental contamination evidence gets. The candidate lost because the voters of Springfield understood, on some level that might not have been fully conscious, that successfully prosecuting Burns would destabilize the economic foundation of their own lives. Burns is their employer. Burns is their power company. Burns is their economy. Voting against Burns is voting against the infrastructure of daily life in Springfield. And that is a vote that most people cannot make even when they know, intellectually, that the alternative is worse. The show makes this explicit at multiple points. When Burns has been temporarily removed from control of the plant through illness, through legal action, through the brief German ownership episode, Springfield's economy immediately shows signs of distress. The town needs the plant and the plant needs Burns. And Burns knows that this dependency is the most effective protection he has. Not the security guards and not the legal team and not the political connections, though he has all of those. The best protection is the one that makes the threat too costly for the people it is threatening to pursue. Homer's relationship to this system is worth examining from a different angle than the one we took in the first section. We established that Homer's incompetence is a feature of Burns's arrangement rather than an oversight. But there is a dimension of Homer's situation that goes beyond his incompetence and into something more personal and more painful. Homer loves his job, not in the sense that he finds the work meaningful or engaging or rewarding in any professional way. He loves having a job. He loves that he has a place to go every day, that he has a routine, that he has a role in the world that other people recognize. He loves that he is, within the specific and limited context of the Springfield nuclear power plant, Sector 7G Safety Inspector Homer Simpson. He has a desk, he has a title, he has a swivel chair and a nameplate and a set of responsibilities that he mostly ignores, but that anchor him to a position in the social order of Springfield. This matters because it means that even if Homer understood what was happening, even if the crayon came out and the radiation damage healed, and he could see clearly for the first time exactly what the plant was and what it was doing, and what his role in maintaining it was, even then, leaving would cost him something that is not easy to quantify, but is very easy to feel. It would cost him the structure, the identity, the daily ritual of going somewhere and being someone. And for Homer, who grew up without his mother and with a father who communicated primarily through emotional unavailability, that structure is not just comfortable, it is survival. Burns exploited this when he engineered the arrangement with Abe. He did not just guarantee Homer's employment, he guaranteed Homer's attachment to the employment. He created conditions that made the job not just a paycheck but a psychological necessity, a place where Homer could go and be, even if the being was largely unconscious and the going was frequently reluctant. And in return, Homer ensures the plant continues operating exactly as Burns needs it to operate, without safety intervention, without meaningful inspection, without any of the oversight that might slow the contamination, might address the violations, might do anything to interrupt the slow, steady poisoning of the town that Burns depends on to remain exactly as it is, compliant, impaired, economically dependent, and incapable of organizing against its own exploitation. The radiation theory is not a metaphor. Within the internal logic of The Simpsons, it is the most literal possible reading of the evidence. The fish have 3 eyes because the water is contaminated. The residents have 4 fingers because the contamination affects fetal development. Homer has an IQ of 55 because the contamination combined with a foreign object left conveniently in his brain has reduced his cognitive function to clinical disability. And Burns has been alive for over a century because the man who designed the contamination also designed his own treatment against its worst effects, because he has always understood exactly what he was releasing into Springfield and exactly what it costs, and he has always been willing to let other people pay that cost while he manages his own exposure with resources none of them can access. The plant is the story. It has always been the story. Every yellow face and every 4-fingered hand and every forgotten catastrophe and every reset, all of it feeds back to the same source. The cracked towers, the leaking pipes, the glowing rats in the basement, and the man in the 3-piece suit who built all of it and has never, in 36 years of depicted villainy, faced anything that could fairly be described as a consequence. Number extended deep dive. The coma. What the dream tells us about Homer. The coma theory has a structural elegance that distinguishes it from most fan theories. Most fan theories require you to accept that the show is secretly telling a different story than the one it appears to be telling. That beneath the surface narrative, there is a hidden narrative visible only to those paying enough attention. The coma theory is different. It does not require a hidden story. It requires only that you take the surface story seriously enough to follow its implications all the way to their conclusion. The implication that Homer Simpson, who entered a coma in the 18th episode of Season 4 and was depicted as waking up at the end of that same episode, may not have actually woken up is not a hidden implication. It is an explicit narrative possibility that the episode creates and does not definitively close. The show tells you Homer wakes up. The show also tells you, in the same episode, that his coma resulted in permanent brain damage. The show does not tell you that the Homer who wakes up is the same Homer who went under. It does not address the question of continuity of consciousness, which is one of the most fundamental questions raised by any coma narrative, because the question is not one that popular episodic television typically needs to address. But The Simpsons is not typical popular episodic television. It is, among other things, a show that has been running long enough to make promises it cannot keep and raise questions it cannot answer. The coma episode raised a question about the continuity of Homer's consciousness that the show has never answered and, under the theory, never could answer, because the answer is the theory. What makes the coma reading particularly powerful is what it does to the emotional register of the entire series. Take any episode you love, a warm one of the show's genuinely moving moments, one of the countless times the show transcended its comedy format to do something that felt true. Now watch it again through the lens of the coma theory. Watch it as a dream generated by a man in a hospital bed, a man who is missing his family, a man whose brain is desperately reconstructing the people he loves from the last clear memory he has of them. Every warm ending becomes warmer and sadder at the same time. Every moment where Homer looks at his family with love and confusion and gratitude, those moments that the show does so well, the ones where Homer is briefly, unexpectedly, entirely himself. Those moments are a man in a coma, reaching towards something he cannot touch. The dream lets him reach it. The dream lets him hold it, briefly, before the episode ends and the simulation resets and everything goes back to the baseline. And every impossible survival becomes a different kind of story. Homer cannot die in the dream. Not really. Not permanently. Not because the show needs him to survive for narrative convenience. Because Homer's dreaming brain is the thing generating the narrative. It cannot kill him because it is him. He is the dreamer. He is the dream. Springfield exists inside him, not around him, and the dream cannot destroy the mind that is dreaming it. Every fall off a cliff, every electrocution, every car crash and explosion and impalement is the dream expressing something, maybe fear, maybe something darker about Homer's interior life, but without real stakes, because the stakes were settled on the day the vending machine fell. The progressive unreality of the later seasons also maps onto what we know about dreaming brains. Dreams follow internal logic, but that logic is not the same as waking logic. It is more associative, more governed by emotion than by causality. A dreaming brain does not need events to follow from each other in the way that waking events must. It can jump from a family moment at the kitchen table to Homer being shot into space without a transition that would make sense in daylight. And as the dreamer's brain deteriorates as the 5% loss of function from the coma compounds with whatever additional damage accumulates over years of unconsciousness, the dream becomes less coherent, more surreal, more willing to abandon even its own internal logic. Season 4 feels grounded because Homer's brain at that point is still mostly intact. The world he is dreaming is still recognizably the world he last consciously experienced. But by Season 10, Season 15, Season 20, the brain generating the dream is a different and more damaged instrument. It can still produce Springfield. It can still produce the Simpsons family and their house on Evergreen Terrace. But it cannot hold the internal consistency of the world it is building the way it could in the beginning. The rules keep changing. The logic keeps slipping. The world keeps becoming more absurd, more disconnected, more like the kind of dream where you are aware, somewhere in the background, that the things happening should not be possible, but you cannot quite bring yourself to wake up. The guest who never comes up in this context but probably should is what happens to Marge in the dream. Marge in the coma theory is both the most stable element of Homer's dream and the most heartbreaking one. She is the person Homer is dreaming about most consistently and most desperately. She is the anchor. The dream builds itself around her, around the need to have her there, to have her look at him with patience and love, to have her continue to choose him despite everything. Every episode where Marge and Homer work through a conflict and find each other again on the other side is Homer's dreaming brain working through the fear of losing her in a place where she cannot actually be lost, because the dream will not allow it. But Marge in the dream cannot grow. She cannot change in any way that Homer's unconscious mind did not predict and install in her before the coma began. She is, as all dream versions of real people are, a construction, a reconstruction. The most loving and careful and detailed reconstruction that Homer's mind is capable of producing, but still a reconstruction. And the dream Homer, who loves this Marge completely, cannot know whether the real Marge, the one in the hospital room, the one who has been sitting by his bed for years or decades, is still there, is still the person he last saw, is still the person who chose him. This is the nightmare underneath the coma dream's warmth. Not that Springfield is dangerous or surreal or impossible, but that the family Homer is dreaming about is a memory. A preserved, unchanging, eternally available memory. And the real family, the one that has been growing and changing and living without him in the waking world, is inaccessible, is on the other side of the unconsciousness, is doing things he will never see, becoming people he will never know, saying things he will never hear. The dream gives Homer everything except the one thing he actually wants, which is not a preserved family in an eternal present. It is his actual family in the actual world, with actual time passing the way time passes, with his children growing up in front of him, with Marge getting older beside him, with all of it being real. The dream is the consolation prize. It is the best thing his damaged brain can offer him, and it is by almost any measure not enough. Number extended deep dive. The Burns shooting, building a case against the official verdict. The Maggie verdict has been the official answer for almost 30 years. In that time, the Who Shot Mr. Burns mystery has become one of those cultural touchstones that gets referenced without examination. Everyone knows Maggie did it, the way everyone knows Darth Vader is Luke's father, or that the butler did it. The answer has been absorbed into the show's cultural legacy and stopped being a question that anyone asks, which is exactly what the people who sealed the investigation wanted. Let us build the case against the official verdict from the ground up, using only what the show has established canonically. Start with access. The person who shot Burns used Burns's own gun. This is established clearly by the detail of the empty holster and the subsequent investigation. Burns's gun left his holster before the shooting. The investigation did not explore how or when this happened, which is itself a significant investigative failure. The chain of custody of the murder weapon is always a central concern in any homicide investigation, and knowing when the gun left its holster and how would have told investigators something important about the shooter's access to Burns's person. A baby in a parking lot, according to the show's official account, found the gun on the ground after Burns dropped it in a struggle over a lollipop. This is possible, but it requires accepting a chain of events that is, at minimum, extremely convenient. Burns happens to drop his gun. The gun lands within reach of an infant. The infant, rather than ignoring it or dropping it immediately, picks it up and holds it with sufficient grip to fire it. The gun discharges, sending a bullet into Burns's chest. And then Maggie is left in the parking lot while Burns staggers to the sundial, apparently neither Maggie nor the gun being subsequently located by any of the investigators who descended on the crime scene. The alternative that someone else took the gun from Burns before the shooting, with planning and intent rather than by chance, is consistent with all of the same evidence and requires fewer coincidences. Now look at who had access to Burns before the town meeting ended. The meeting took place at what appears to have been a public location within Springfield, a town hall or similar civic space, and it was attended by the full complement of Burns's known enemies, all of whom had arrived with varying degrees of anger and, in some cases, weapons. The crowd was hostile. The situation was emotionally charged. Burns was the target of collective rage. In those conditions, anyone who wanted to get close enough to Burns to remove a gun from his holster would have had significant cover in the confusion of the crowd. Smithers is the most obvious candidate for pre-meeting gun access, not because of motive but because of knowledge. Smithers knows Burns's routines, habits, and personal effects with extraordinary intimacy. If anyone in Springfield knew that Burns carried a gun in a specific holster, knew where that holster was on his body, and knew how to access it without drawing attention, it was Smithers. Smithers' alibi established through the subsequent discovery that he was blackout drunk and shot someone else entirely is solid enough that he is cleared of the actual shooting. But being cleared of the shooting does not mean he had nothing to do with the events leading up to it. Homer's fingerprints on the gun have never been satisfactorily explained. The official resolution attributes them to Homer having handled the gun at some point. He is, after all, the kind of person who picks up objects he finds interesting without thinking about whether he should, and dismisses them as circumstantial, once Burns identifies Maggie. But fingerprints on a murder weapon are not easily explained away. If Homer handled the gun, when did he handle it, and where, and in what context? The investigation did not answer these questions. The investigation stopped asking questions the moment Burns pointed at the baby. Homer's Season 18 confession is the piece of evidence that the official verdict cannot accommodate at all. It does not matter whether Homer was lying when he said he shot Burns. What matters is that he said it, on camera, in a canonical episode, and nobody in Springfield, not the police, not the legal system, not any of the characters present treated it as the confession it was. Either the confession is false, in which case the show is depicting Homer making up a story about attempted murder for reasons that are not entirely clear, or the confession is true, in which case the original verdict was wrong and a 30-year-old case needs to be reopened. The show chose not to pursue either of these threads. It dropped the confession as a throwaway moment and moved on, which is, by this point, a recognizable move. When Springfield cannot accommodate a truth, it does not debate the truth. It just keeps moving, faster than the truth can keep up. The Marge theory, which we touched on briefly, deserves more sustained attention. The argument is not just that Marge had motive and access. The argument is that Marge had a specific kind of motive that the show has consistently depicted but never named. Marge Simpson is a fierce, protective mother. This is one of her most consistently depicted traits across the entire run of the show. When her children are threatened, Marge's response is not measured or reasonable or calibrated to social norms. It is instinctive and total. She has confronted teachers, administrators, community leaders, corporate representatives, and various other authority figures with a directness that surprises people who underestimate her based on her apparent gentleness. She is not gentle when her children are in danger. She is implacable. By the time of the shooting, Burns had threatened her children's school by destroying its budget. He had threatened her family's pet by injuring Santa's little helper. He had threatened the entire town where her children live by stealing their sunlight. He had systematically and deliberately created conditions that made the lives of everyone Marge loves objectively worse, for reasons of pure personal profit and power. Burns has also been infatuated with Marge, in the episode Marge Gets a Job, in a way that gave him a personal stake in her well-being. If Marge shot Burns, Burns had a reason beyond the legal consequence to not name her. He protected the woman he had feelings for. He woke from his coma, looked around the hospital room, remembered what had happened, remembered her face in the parking lot, and chose not to give her up. And when the investigation needed someone to blame, When Chief Wiggum needed an answer that would close the case and remove the pressure from every adult suspect, the baby in the parking lot was the answer that worked for everyone. Too young to prosecute. Too young to deny it. Too young to understand what she was being accused of. The perfect answer for a system that needed a resolution without requiring anyone in a position of actual consequence to face one. What the show gives you in the end is not a solved mystery. It gives you a resolved one. These are different. Resolution requires only an official answer. Solving requires the right one. Number extended deep dive. Springfield's social contract, the mechanics of collective forgetting. The principal and the pauper introduced us to the mechanism. But the mechanism did not start there. It has been operating since the very beginning of the show, and understanding how it works in its subtler expressions is what allows you to see Springfield clearly as the specific kind of community it is. Every community has a version of this mechanism. The collective management of shared reality is one of the fundamental functions of community life. We decide, together, what counts as real, what counts as significant, what deserves to be remembered, and what can be safely forgotten. We do this through conversation and gossip and the writing of local history and the decisions about what to put on monuments and what to leave out of the official record. We do it through the kinds of stories we tell about ourselves and the kinds of stories we discourage. Springfield does all of these things too, but in a more compressed and more visible way, because the show is able to show you the results across a timeline that no real community would experience so dramatically. In a real community, the collective management of reality happens slowly, over decades or generations, and the mechanism is so gradual that most of the people participating in it do not realize they are participating in it. In Springfield, it happens between episodes, which means you can see it happening every time you binge the show and notice that whatever cataclysm ended the previous episode has been entirely forgotten by the time the next one begins. The dome is the most extreme example. The United States federal government sealed Springfield under a massive glass dome for environmental contamination. This is the central premise of the Simpsons movie. The dome is built, it traps the entire population, Homer escapes and eventually returns to save the day, and the dome is removed. End of movie. By the time the show's next season aired, the dome was not mentioned. Not referenced in passing, not treated as a recent traumatic event that had permanently altered Springfield's relationship with its own government, not used as context for anything. Gone. The dome happened and then Springfield forgot that the dome happened. And the audience is expected to accept this reset because it is the show's established convention, and challenging it would disrupt the episodic format. But within the theory of Springfield as a community that actively manages its own reality through collective agreement, the dome reset is not a plot convenience. It is the most dramatic example of the mechanism working exactly as it always works. Springfield experienced a thing. The thing was uncomfortable, traumatic, and if properly remembered and processed would have required significant changes to how the community relates to burns and the plant and its own environmental situation. So Springfield didn't remember it. Not because memory is impossible, but because the social cost of remembering was calculated, collectively and unconsciously, to exceed the social cost of forgetting. This pattern repeats across dozens of episodes. Springfield is invaded. Springfield forgets. Springfield burns down significant portions of itself in a riot. Springfield forgets. Springfield elects a corrupt official who does measurable damage before being removed. Springfield forgets. The mechanism is reliable because it has to be. A community that genuinely and fully processed every catastrophic thing that happened to it would eventually be unable to function. The weight of accumulated trauma would become too heavy to carry. Forgetting is adaptive. It is, in a real psychological sense, a survival mechanism. The problem, and this is what the show makes visible in a way that most other depictions of community life do not, is that the mechanism does not discriminate. It does not forget only the traumatic and preserve the useful. It forgets everything that would require the community to change, everything that would require confronting the power structure, everything that would destabilize the arrangement that keeps Springfield functional at the most basic level. The dome would have required confronting burns, so the dome is forgotten. The three-eyed fish would require confronting burns, so the fish becomes a brief news story and then disappears from public discourse. Mona Simpson's return would require confronting Burns, so Mona is chased away, and Homer processes his grief alone, and the community's awareness of Burns's role in her exile never consolidates into anything actionable. Burns himself seems to understand this mechanism and has, across many episodes, demonstrated an awareness of how to use it. He does not just prevent bad things from happening to him. He allows bad things to happen and then waits for Springfield to forget them. He has developed an almost perfect read on the town's memory threshold, the point at which an event has receded enough from active consciousness that it can no longer function as the basis for organized action. He operates just below that threshold in everything he does. He is never so egregious that he cannot wait out the memory. He has time. He has had a century of time. And Springfield, which cannot hold on to a thought across 2 consecutive episodes, always comes back to baseline before Burns has to do anything more than wait. The collective memory failure is also what makes the coma theory and the radiation theory work together so elegantly. Both theories predict that the people of Springfield should have diminished capacity for holding and processing complex information about their own situation. The coma theory says this because they are dream constructs, and dream constructs do not maintain the kind of continuous, accumulating awareness that waking consciousness produces. The radiation theory says this because chronic neurological damage from radiation exposure disrupts exactly the cognitive functions responsible for this kind of sustained analytical thinking. Both theories predict, in other words, that Springfield should display exactly the pattern of memory and behavior that the community denial reading describes. The forget everything, reset to baseline pattern is what you get when you have a population that cannot hold complex thoughts across time, whether because they are dream characters or because they are radiation damaged. And when you have all 3 of these things operating simultaneously, the radiation diminishing cognitive function, the coma creating a population of dream constructs who do not require internal consistency, and the community's social mechanism actively working to forget anything inconvenient, you have a town that is almost perfectly sealed against self-knowledge. A place where the truth can be right there on the surface, visible and documented, and literally swimming in the river with an extra eye, and the population will look at it and say it is just how things are around here, and go back to their day. Springfield is not exceptional in any of these dynamics. These are all things that real communities do, in less extreme forms, for less extreme reasons, under less extreme conditions. The show exaggerates them enough to make them visible, and it does so with enough comic cushioning that the visibility is bearable. But the dynamics themselves are recognizable. You have seen them. You have lived in a place that did some version of one of these things. Every community has its blind spots, its agreed-upon fictions, its truths that everyone knows and nobody says. Springfield just has all of them at once, running at maximum intensity in a town where the fish glow and the sky has been blocked and the water runs yellow and everybody is fine, everything is completely fine. Number extended deep dive. The floating timeline, a deeper reading. We said in the timeline section that the floating timeline is ours, that we built the loop and we maintain it by tuning in every week. This deserves more development because it is the most interesting claim in the entire video and the one most worth sitting with. The argument is not just that audiences are attached to familiar characters and resist change. That is true, but it is also fairly obvious. The argument is more specific. The argument is that the Simpsons family serves a particular cultural function in American life that requires their frozen state. They are not just beloved characters. They are representative characters. They stand in for something. Think about when the show debuted, December 1989, the tail end of a decade defined by a specific and increasingly untenable ideal of the American family. The 1980s version of the American family was aspirational, polished, and demographically specific in ways that excluded most actual American families. The decade's dominant image of domestic life was expensive and confident and fundamentally disconnected from the economic realities that most American households were living through. The Simpsons, from its first episode, was positioned against this image. Homer and Marge are not aspirational. They are not wealthy. They are not sordid. They are a family with too many problems and not enough money, and a house that requires constant small repairs, and children who behave like actual children rather than like the children in advertisements. They were received immediately as a corrective, as a more honest image of what American family life actually looked like. And in the decades since, as the distance between the idealized American family and the real one has grown even wider, the Simpsons have remained. Not just as a corrective, but as a constant, as the stable image against which everything else can be measured. The Simpsons are still there, on their couch, in their house, with their specific and limited means, and their enormous and complicated love for each other, while everything around them economically, politically, culturally continues to change in ways that make the American family feel more precarious with each passing year. The floating timeline keeps them stable in a landscape where stability is increasingly rare, and the audience's attachment to that stability is not weakness or sentimentality. It is a response to a genuine cultural need. We need something to stay the same. We need a version of the American family that is resilient enough to survive anything, and The Simpsons have survived everything, literally everything, from nuclear near misses to federal containment domes, to Homer's coma, to Maggie's shooting, to 3 decades of accumulated impossibility, and still be there next week, on the couch, together. The show cannot end because the thing it represents cannot end. The idea of the American family as an institution that persists through chaos, that holds together even when everything around it is coming apart, that chooses itself over and over again, no matter what the world throws at it. This idea is too important to the cultural imagination to allow its primary representation to age into something unrecognizable. Bart turning 11 would be funny in the episode where it happens, and then it would be sad, because it would mean that Bart had been 11 for a year, and then 12, and then a teenager, and then an adult, and the Bart who was 10 and skateboarding and causing trouble at Springfield Elementary would be gone, replaced by someone we do not know yet. And the loss of the 10-year-old Bart would be the loss of something that belongs not just to the show, but to the cultural memory of everyone who grew up with it. This is why the flash-forward episodes, the ones that show the future of the Simpsons family, are always framed as alternates, as what-ifs, as glimpses through windows that close again before anything from the other side can get through. The show can imagine its characters in the future. It refuses to let them live there, because the future is where the family stops being the Simpsons and becomes just a family. Just ordinary people, aging like ordinary people age, moving through their lives with the ordinary diminishment that time brings to everyone. The characters are not afraid of aging. The show is afraid of meaning something different than it currently means. And as long as Bart is 10, and Lisa is 8, and Maggie is still in her first year of life, the show means the same thing it has always meant. The indestructible, impossible, entirely improbable American family, still together, still making it work, still going home to that couch at the end of every episode. We pressed pause. We keep pressing pause. And as long as we do, Springfield stays frozen, which is either the most comforting thing in the world or the saddest, depending on whether you are more afraid of change or of stasis. Number extended deep dive, Ned Flanders and the God problem. The detail about God talking to Homer and not to Ned is the darkest thing in the entire history of The Simpsons. It does not announce itself as dark. It is never the subject of an episode. It is never examined directly or given the weight its implications deserve. It is simply true, within the show's internal logic, and it sits there, episode after episode, quietly devastating anyone who looks at it the right way. Let us establish the theological landscape of the Simpsons universe, because it is important to be precise about what the show has actually confirmed versus what it has simply implied. God exists in the Simpsons universe. This is not a matter of speculation. God has appeared as a character in the show, depicted visually, given dialogue, shown interacting with other characters. The show did not depict God as an ambiguous figure or a possibly imaginary presence. It depicted God clearly, as a real and active entity within the show's world. God has a face. God has a voice. God has preferences and opinions and the ability to interact directly with the people of Springfield. God has spoken to Homer multiple times across multiple episodes. Their interactions range from the substantial Season 4 premiere conversation about Homer's fate to the more casual, suggesting that the line of communication between Homer and God is open and functional and regularly used. In Homer the Heretic, which is the Season 4 premiere and also the episode where God tells Homer his time is coming, God appears to Homer in a dream after Homer decides to stop going to church. The conversation is warm and personal. God discusses Homer's spiritual situation with the specific familiarity of someone who has been paying close attention. Homer wakes up, and what follows the events of the episode, Homer's brief experiment with a personal spirituality that does not involve church attendance, is depicted as a conversation between Homer and God that continues in the fabric of the episode's events rather than just in the dream. God talks to Homer. God is willing to engage with Homer. God has, across the show's run, demonstrated enough personal interest in Homer's life and well-being to show up in his dreams, to send him messages through the events of his life, to treat him as someone worth the investment of divine attention. Ned Flanders goes to church every week. Ned Flanders prays daily, in a sustained and sincere and deeply felt way. Ned Flanders has organized his entire life around his relationship with God, not just in the sense of following moral rules, but in the sense of treating God as a genuine presence, a real companion, the primary relationship through which everything else in his life is understood and managed. His faith is not casual. It is not habitual. It is the most intentional and the most continuously enacted commitment of Ned's entire depicted existence. And God, in 36 years of The Simpsons, has never once spoken directly to Ned Flanders. Not a dream conversation. Not a coincidence that functions as a message. Not a moment where the events of an episode resolve in a way that feels like God taking Ned's side. Nothing. The divine communication apparatus that Homer has access to, and that Ned should, by any theological logic that takes seriously what the show has established, have at least as much access to, is simply unavailable to the show's most devoted believer. This could be read as a joke about the irony of faith. The man who never tries gets the divine attention. The man who tries constantly gets nothing. Haha, very funny. Moving on. But it does not read as a joke. Not once you know about Ned's psychological history. Not once you understand that his devoutness is not a freely chosen spiritual orientation, but the end product of years of behavioral conditioning. Ned was conditioned to be exactly what he appears to be: kind, generous, patient, faithful. The conditioning replaced the child who was naturally something different with the adult who has been performing goodness ever since. His faith is, in a profound and uncomfortable sense, the cage that keeps the rest of him contained. And God sees all of this within the show's established theology and responds with silence. What does it mean within the logic of the show's universe that God talks to Homer and not to Ned? One reading is theological in the traditional sense. God's grace is not earned through behavior, and the man who performs goodness without genuine freedom is less available to grace than the man who behaves badly but chooses freely. This is actually a coherent theological position with roots in serious religious philosophy. The idea that sincere moral striving can become a substitute for genuine spiritual encounter, that doing the right things for the right seeming reasons can close you off to the real thing. This is not an absurd theological claim. It is a claim that various religious traditions have made in various forms. But the show does not frame this as theology. It frames it as the ordinary background of Ned's life. And in that framing, it is simply cruel. Ned does everything right and gets nothing. Homer does everything wrong and gets conversations with God. The cruelest reading of this, the one that connects most directly to the structural analysis of Springfield as a system that does not reward goodness, is the simplest one. In Springfield, God plays favorites, and God's favorites are not the most devout or the most moral or the most consistently good. God's favorites are the interesting ones, the ones who create situations, who cause problems, whose lives generate stories worth telling. Homer generates stories. Homer's incompetence and his love and his occasional moments of insight and his many, many failures are the engine of the show's drama. He is interesting. He is worth paying attention to. Ned Flanders is not interesting in that sense. He is consistent. He is reliable. He does what he is supposed to do every week, and the doing of it generates no drama because it is expected. Ned's goodness is the show's background, the stable contrast against which Homer's chaos reads as funny. And God, within the show's theology, apparently rewards the chaos more than the consistency. This is the show's darkest thesis, stated quietly and never examined. The universe does not care about virtue. It cares about narrative, and narrative requires problems. Ned has solved his problems, or, more precisely, he has been conditioned to not feel them as problems anymore, and in solving them he has made himself narratively invisible. Homer's problems are endless and genuine, and they drive 36 years of television. God talks to the show's protagonist, and the show's protagonist is not the most moral person in Springfield. He is the most compelling one. Number. Final meditation. What Springfield costs us and why we keep paying. We have been in Springfield for a long time now. We have looked at it from every angle this video set out to examine, and the thing that emerges from all of those angles, the radiation, the coma, the shooting, the immortal billionaire, the collective denial, The silent genius, the predictions, the missing mother, the geographic impossibility, the frozen timeline, and the two neighbors who represent everything the system does to the people it contains is a single, unified picture of a place that is not quite what it appears to be. Springfield appears to be a comedy backdrop. It appears to be a colorful, anarchic, endlessly renewable setting for domestic comedy and satire. And it is those things. The comedy is real. The satire is real. The show has been making people laugh for 36 years, and the laughter is genuine, not strained, not forced out of loyalty to an institution, but actually funny. The show at its best is as funny as anything television has produced in its history. But underneath the comedy, visible to anyone who has spent the time we have just spent looking, is a fully realized portrait of a specific kind of place. A place that is contaminated in multiple senses simultaneously. Physically, by a nuclear facility that has been leaking for decades. Politically, by a single wealthy individual whose control over the town's economy gives him effective veto over anything that might limit his power. Psychologically, by the collective agreement to not see what is directly in front of everyone. And maybe, just maybe, literally by existing inside the dreaming mind of a man who has been unconscious since 1993 and who is holding his family together in the only place he can still reach them. What Springfield costs the people who live in it is visible in every character we have examined. Homer pays with his intelligence, his potential, his mother, his clear sight of his own life. Marge pays with her patience, which is not the virtue it appears to be but the thing left after everything easier has been taken. Lisa pays with her isolation, the loneliness of seeing clearly in a place that has decided clarity is dangerous. Maggie pays with her childhood, hiding what she is behind a performance of helplessness because the alternative is to be visible, and visibility in Springfield is the first step toward being dismissed. Ned pays with his interior life, sealed away behind conditioning, God not answering. Burns pays with nothing. Burns never pays. And we, the audience, pay with something too. We pay with the willingness to keep watching. We pay with the weekly investment of attention in a show that we know, at some level, has been telling us things about the world we live in that are not entirely comfortable. We pay with the love that attaches us to a family we cannot help caring about, even knowing everything the theories suggest about what that family actually is and where they actually live. The question the show leaves you with, the one that sits underneath every theory we have traced tonight, is whether that investment is worth it. Whether spending this many hours in Springfield, this much emotional attention on this particular family in this particular impossible town, adds up to something. The answer, which the show does not provide directly but which the accumulated evidence of its existence suggests, is probably yes. Because Springfield, for all its darkness, is also the place where Homer looks at Marge across a kitchen table and is briefly entirely overcome by the fact that she is still there. It is the place where Lisa sits in her room with her saxophone and plays something beautiful into the air of a house that does not deserve it, and the music is real even if nothing else is. It is the place where Bart, despite everything, despite the school and the town and the radiation and the absent justice and the billionaire and the resetting and the forgetting, still manages to be funny, still manages to pull off the prank, still manages to be the kid on the skateboard who went too fast and fell and got up and went again. The loop is not just a prison, it is also a home. And homes, even damaged ones, even ones built on contaminated ground over cracked foundations with faulty wiring and a leaking reactor down the road, homes are worth something. They are worth the weight of whatever it costs to maintain them. Springfield will never be fixed. Burns will never face consequences. The contamination will never be cleaned up. Homer will never fully understand his own life. Maggie will never reveal what she is waiting to do. The timeline will never land. These things are not going to happen because they cannot happen inside the loop, and the loop is not going to stop because we will not let it stop. But every week, on the couch, the family is together, and Homer falls asleep, and Marge watches over him, and Bart and Lisa argue about something that does not matter, and Maggie sits in the corner with her enormous eyes taking in everything, storing everything, waiting with the patience of someone who has decided that when the time comes, she will know it. And the credits roll, and Springfield stays exactly as it was, and we will be back next week, because it is home, and we live there too. Number. The Burns Empire. How one man owns a town without anyone noticing. We have talked about Burns across several sections now, but there is a dimension of his operation that deserves its own sustained examination, Because the way Burns owns Springfield is not through the obvious mechanisms. It is not through legal title to most of the town's real estate, though his holdings are extensive. It is not through explicit political control, though his influence over Springfield's elected officials is well documented across hundreds of episodes. The way Burns owns Springfield is through something older and more fundamental than any of these surface mechanisms. He owns the town's relationship with necessity. This is a concept that is easier to see in practice than to define abstractly. Necessity is the thing you cannot do without. Food, water, shelter, warmth, light. The things whose absence creates immediate, undeniable, life-threatening crisis. When a single entity controls access to one of these things for an entire community, that entity does not need to exercise explicit power over that community. The community manages itself on behalf of the entity's interests, because the alternative being the loss of the necessity, is too catastrophic to risk. Burns controls electricity. In the modern world, electricity is not a luxury. It is as close to a physical necessity as anything that was not a necessity 100 years ago. Without electricity, hospitals lose function, food storage fails, communication collapses. The basic infrastructure of daily life in a contemporary community depends on reliable electrical power in ways that people only become fully aware of during power outages, when the dependency that normally sits invisible suddenly becomes very visible indeed. Springfield gets its electricity from Burns's plant. This is not metaphor. This is the literal situation the show has established. Burns is Springfield's sole power provider. There is no alternative grid, no secondary provider, no municipal power authority. Burns, and Burns alone, generates the electricity that keeps Springfield's lights on, and its hospitals running, and its homes heated, and its schools functional. And Burns knows this, and Springfield knows this. The dome scenario in the Simpsons movie is actually the clearest illustration of this dependency in practice. When the EPA sealed Springfield under the dome, Burns's reaction was not panic, it was calculation. A sealed dome means a contained population. A contained population with no access to outside resources means a population entirely dependent on whatever is available inside the dome. And what is inside the dome, generating the only power available to anyone, is Burns's plant. The dome did not threaten Burns's position, it strengthened it. A contained Springfield is an even more captive market than an open one. This is why Burns's reaction to external threats has always been to find the angle that makes the threat into an opportunity. He does not resist catastrophe. He absorbs it and converts it into leverage. Every crisis that hits Springfield either leaves him stronger or leaves him exactly as he was, because Burns has spent over a century engineering a position in which most of the possible outcomes are favorable to him. The ones that are not favorable are the ones he has to work against directly, and he has the resources and the will to do that work. The power dependency also explains something about Homer's employment that we have touched on but not fully developed. Homer is not just kept employed because of the deal with Abe, though that deal matters. Homer is kept employed because the Springfield nuclear power plant cannot be adequately staffed with competent people. Competent nuclear safety professionals are trained in environments that take safety seriously. They understand what the violations at Burns's plant represent. They understand the public health implications. They understand what the regulatory response to those violations should be, and they understand their professional obligation to trigger that response. Burns cannot hire those people. A competent nuclear safety inspector would submit a report within the first week of employment that would result in the plant being shut down. And a shut-down plant means no electricity, means catastrophic economic disruption, means the collapse of the dependency structure Burns has spent a century building. So Burns cannot hire competence. He can only hire Homer, or people like Homer, people whose limitations prevent them from understanding what they are looking at, people whose desperation or dysfunction or cognitive impairment makes them willing to accept conditions that a competent professional would immediately refuse. The plant's workforce broadly reflects this constraint. The people who work at the nuclear plant in Springfield are not nuclear professionals. They are Springfield residents doing a job they do not have the training or the intellectual capacity to do safely, because no one with the training and capacity would accept the working conditions. The plant is not understaffed through negligence. It is understaffed through design. Burns needs incompetent workers because competent workers would shut him down. This creates a feedback loop with the radiation theory that is, once you see it, genuinely difficult to unsee. The plant contaminates Springfield. The contamination reduces the cognitive capacity of Springfield's population. The reduced cognitive capacity means the population cannot produce adequate nuclear safety professionals. The absence of adequate nuclear safety professionals means Burns can continue operating the plant in violation of every relevant safety standard. The continued operation of the plant continues contaminating Springfield. The contamination continues reducing cognitive capacity. It is a closed system that produces exactly what it was designed to produce: an indefinitely compliant workforce, too cognitively impaired by the thing they are working near to understand what the thing is doing to them. Burns, who understands radiation, who manages his own radiation exposure with extraordinary precision, who would never in 1,000 years drink unfiltered Springfield tap water, or breathe unfiltered Springfield air, or live in a house downwind of his own cooling towers. Burns has engineered this system, and he maintains it through a combination of deliberate policy, strategic hiring, and the kind of long-term patience that only comes from having been alive long enough to see what patience actually produces. The other dimension of Burns's ownership of Springfield that deserves attention is his relationship with the town's institutions. The show has depicted Burns's influence extending into Springfield's legal system, its medical system, its educational system, and its political system, in each case through a combination of financial pressure and long-established relationships. Judge Snyder, who in the Principal and the Pauper episode issued the legal decree that made Tamzarian legally Skinner and criminalized speaking the truth about it, is a figure who has appeared across many episodes in situations that suggest his judicial independence is somewhat theoretical. The show has not directly depicted Burns buying Snyder's verdicts. It has not needed to be that explicit, but the pattern of the judge's decisions, across contexts where Burns's interests are at stake, is consistent enough to suggest an accommodation. Chief Wiggum's relationship with Burns is even more clearly compromised. The police department has, across hundreds of episodes, demonstrated a consistent failure to pursue cases that would implicate Burns or his operation, and an equally consistent willingness to pursue cases that serve Burns's interests. This is not presented as corruption in the dramatic, explicit sense of cash changing hands in parking garages. It is presented as the normal operation of a small-town police department that understands which way the wind is blowing and has decided, collectively and without drama, to blow with it. The medical establishment is the most disturbing institutional compromise, because the medical establishment is the one whose failure to function properly has the most direct impact on the health of Springfield's population. If the radiation theory is correct, if Springfield's residents have been experiencing chronic radiation exposure for decades, then the local medical system should be the institution most clearly positioned to observe, document the effects. Elevated cancer rates, developmental anomalies in children, neurological damage consistent with radiation exposure, these are all observable, measurable, documentable things that a functioning medical establishment would identify and report. The Springfield medical establishment does not appear to report any of these things. The show has depicted Springfield's doctors as variously incompetent, negligent, or operating in ways that suggest they are aware of certain things they have chosen not to pursue. Dr. Nick Riviera, the show's recurring comic physician, represents the most extreme version of this dysfunction, a man who is clearly unqualified to practice medicine, who makes errors that would end a real doctor's career and license, but who continues practicing in Springfield because Springfield's standards for what constitutes acceptable medical care have been set very low. So low, in fact, that they might be exactly as low as Burns would need them to be to prevent the medical system from generating documentation that could support action against his plant. And Homer's crayon, which we return to again because it keeps coming back, which is itself a metaphor for the way certain things in Springfield refuse to stay buried. Homer's crayon was not found by any Springfield doctor. It was not found because Springfield's doctors did not look for it. They treated Homer across his entire adult life without ever running the diagnostic that would have revealed a foreign object in his brain. This is not medical incompetence. Medical incompetence would have missed it by accident. Consistent, universal, unvarying failure to find something findable requires something more systematic. It requires either that the diagnostic was never ordered, or that it was ordered and the results were managed before they reached the patient. Either way, the outcome serves Burns perfectly. A Homer Simpson who understood his own situation would be a different kind of employee. A Homer Simpson who knew that his cognitive impairment was caused in part by a foreign object that could be removed would eventually have that object removed, would emerge from the fog, and would see his employer with new clarity. Burns cannot afford that. Burns has built his entire arrangement in Sector 7G around the specific, calibrated, maintained incompetence of Homer Simpson. And the medical system in Springfield has, across Homer's entire adult life, cooperated in maintaining that incompetence by never finding the thing that was causing it. The show tells you all of this, not in a single dramatic revelation, but in the accumulated weight of 100 small details, each one individually deniable, collectively impossible to ignore. Burns owns Springfield. He owns it through electricity and economics and institutional capture and the long-term strategic management of the population's cognitive capacity. He has been doing this for over a century. And the town he has built, the contaminated, amnesiac, four-fingered, yellow-skinned, beautifully dysfunctional town, is the monument to his patience and his intelligence and his absolute, unwavering commitment to never being held responsible for anything he has done. Springfield is his masterpiece. Homer Simpson is his masterpiece's most essential supporting element. And the show has been showing you this since the first episode aired in December 1989. Number, The Simpsons and the American Family, a 36-year cultural argument. The Simpsons debuted with a specific cultural argument embedded in its premise. The argument was that the American family, as depicted in popular media, was a lie. Not just a simplification or an idealization, but an active, sustained misrepresentation of what families actually were and how they actually functioned and what they actually needed. The 1980s family sitcom had reached a particular peak of unreality. The families on television were wealthy or comfortable. Their problems were resolvable within 22 minutes. Their conflicts were never serious enough to leave lasting damage. Their children were obedient or charmingly mischievous rather than genuinely difficult. And their parents maintained the kind of calm, authoritative, consistently good-humored parenting that no actual parent in the history of the world has ever been able to sustain across the demands of daily life. Homer Simpson was the answer to all of that. Homer was tired. Homer was overwhelmed. Homer made mistakes that had real consequences and then made similar mistakes again because people do not change as completely or as permanently as television had been suggesting they do. Homer loved his children with genuine intensity and still managed, through the combination of his limitations and the overwhelming complexity of daily life, to fail them regularly and meaningfully. Homer was a cartoon, but Homer was also, in some essential way, more real than the parents who had preceded him on American television. Marge was the counterpoint and the foundation. Marge's patience is not a character trait in the simple sense. It is the load-bearing wall of the Simpson family's architecture. Without Marge's sustained, extraordinary, sometimes almost superhuman capacity to maintain equilibrium in the face of everything that Homer and the children and Springfield itself throw at her, the family collapses. The show knows this. The episodes that threaten Marge's stability, the ones where her patience runs out, where the equilibrium breaks, where Marge hits her limit, are always the most emotionally charged. Because those are the episodes where the audience confronts what it would mean for the load-bearing wall to give way. Bart was the child that 1980s television had refused to depict. Not a lovably mischievous kid who learned his lesson by the end of the episode, but a genuinely difficult child. A child with a genuine and deep resistance to the authority of the institutions that were trying to shape him. A child whose rebellion was not cute but was also not evil, was in fact the entirely comprehensible response of an intelligent person to an environment that kept expecting him to be something he was not. Lisa was something rarer and, in some ways, more radical. Lisa was a child who was smarter than the adults around her, and the show was willing to take this seriously. Not as a one-joke premise, not as an excuse for a single episode about a precocious kid, but as a sustained condition with real consequences. Being smarter than your environment is not a gift without cost. The cost is isolation. The cost is the gap between what you can see and what you can say, between what you understand and what anyone around you is willing to hear. Lisa has been paying that cost for 36 years on television, and the show has never fully blinked from the reality of what it costs. And Maggie, who we have spent considerable time with in this video, is the wild card, the show's most honest acknowledgement that children contain capacities that adults cannot predict or control or fully understand. Every parent looks at a very young child and wonders, in moments of honesty, who this person is going to be, what is in there, what is forming behind those enormous eyes. Maggie, in her silence and her demonstrated capabilities, is the show's answer to that question pressed to its most extreme possible conclusion. The answer is, you do not know. And whatever is in there might be beyond anything you have imagined. The family, taken together, is not an idealized family. It is not an aspirational family. It is a family that is trying. A family that fails and recovers and fails differently the next time and recovers again and keeps going. A family that loves each other in ways that are sometimes expressed clearly and sometimes buried under too many other things to be visible, but that are always present, always the thing underneath everything else. And this is what the floating timeline is actually protecting. Not any specific episode, not any specific storyline, not the jobs or the school or the power plant or any of the Springfield infrastructure that surrounds the family. The floating timeline is protecting the trying. The ongoing, never finished, never successful, never abandoned project of being a family together. If the family ages, the project changes. The children grow up and leave. Homer and Marge become an empty nest couple with a different dynamic and different problems. The specific texture of what this family is: children in the house, parents managing, everyone trying and failing and trying again, in the specific configurations of this specific household ends. America needs the project not to end. America needs, in some deep and largely unconscious way, to look at the couch on Evergreen Terrace and see the family still there, still trying, still intact. Because if the family can stay together through everything Springfield has thrown at them, the radiation and the billionaire and the dome and the coma and the shooting and the 36 years of accumulated impossibility, then maybe the institution of the family itself is more resilient than the evidence of any individual family's daily experience would suggest. The Simpsons is the argument that the American family survives. Not easily, not without damage, not without periods of radical dysfunction and things that should have been resolved differently and wounds that do not fully heal. But it survives. They choose it, week after week, even when the choice is hard, even when the alternative might be easier. They choose the couch and the television and the dinner table and each other. And we watch. And we choose to keep watching. And the loop keeps running. Number. The Treehouse of Horror. When Springfield's darkness becomes visible, there is one annual tradition in The Simpsons that deserves mention in any comprehensive analysis of the show's relationship with darkness. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, the annual Halloween anthology specials, occupy a strange space in the show's canon. They are non-canonical, explicitly framed as horror anthology stories told by the characters rather than stories about the characters. They are not meant to count. What happens in a Treehouse of Horror episode does not happen to the actual Simpsons family. And yet, the Treehouse of Horror episodes have, across 3 decades, depicted the Springfield family in situations that amplify and clarify something that the main canon approaches more carefully. The horror anthology format gives the writers permission to say things about these characters and this family that the standard episode format cannot say directly. The darkness that the main series approaches through theory and implication becomes visible in Treehouse of Horror. Homer is a killer in Treehouse of Horror, multiple times across multiple segments, sometimes literally murderous, sometimes monstrous in more metaphorical ways, but the id that the main series keeps restrained through Homer's essential benevolence gets permission in the horror episodes to express itself. And what it expresses is not alien to the Homer we know. It is an extension of him. The frustration, the resentment, the accumulated small disappointments of a life that has not delivered what a person wants, these are present in regular Homer, contained and redirected and converted into the particular kind of blundering that the show finds funny. In Treehouse Homer, the container comes off. Bart and Lisa are frequently depicted in these episodes as children in genuine danger, not the cartoon peril of the regular series, but something with the specific texture of real childhood fear. The fear of being unprotected. The fear of adults being inadequate. The fear of the world being more dangerous than the people responsible for your safety have told you it is. These fears live in the main series too, but they are wrapped in enough comedy and reassurance to remain tolerable. In Treehouse, they surface more directly. The town of Springfield in these episodes frequently turns on itself. Mobs form. Individuals are sacrificed. The community that the regular series depicts as capable of extraordinary collective action, usually stupid collective action, but collective nonetheless, reveals in Treehouse the extent to which its social cohesion is conditional and fragile. When the frame is horror, Springfield's willingness to abandon its members becomes visible in ways that the regular series softens. The horror episodes are the show's ID. They are what Springfield would look like if the comedy frame were removed and the show were honest, without hedging, about what it has been telling you. The contamination, the power dynamics, the collective violence barely contained beneath the surface of community life, the specific vulnerabilities of individual characters who are more fragile than they appear in their regular episode form, all of it comes into focus when the Halloween frame removes the obligation to be reassuring. Some fans dismiss the Treehouse episodes as non-canonical fun that does not connect to the main series. But even if they are non-canonical in plot terms, they are canonical in character terms. The things these episodes reveal about who Homer and Bart and Lisa and Marge are underneath the standard narrative, these are real. The show knows these things about its characters. It reveals them in Treehouse because Treehouse is the place it has permission to, which is in itself a kind of collective denial. We accept the Treehouse revelations as Halloween fun and then return to the standard series without applying what Treehouse showed us. We participate in Springfield's amnesia even about the horror episodes. We let the darkness be contained in the special annual event and then file it away until next October. That is very Springfield of us. Number, the secondary characters and what they tell us about Springfield. A town is more than its main characters. Springfield is populated with dozens of secondary and recurring characters, each of whom represents a different expression of what Springfield does to the people who live in it. We have examined Hans Molleman and Ned Flanders in detail, but there are others worth pausing on. Groundskeeper Willie occupies a specific position in the show's ecology. He is a man of considerable physical strength and genuine competence who exists in a role that is beneath him and who is treated with contempt by the institution that employs him. Willie knows things about Springfield Elementary that no other character does. He maintains the infrastructure. He is present in the margins of the school's life in ways that make him aware of things that the administration is not. He is also consistently expendable. When budget cuts come, Willie is the first position eliminated. When something goes wrong that needs a scapegoat, Willie is available. He has survived his own death several times, usually in the same absurd register as Molman, but without the show's consistent attention to his mortality as a running theme. What Willie represents is the person who does the actual work of maintaining the institutions that other people take credit for running. The school exists because Willie maintains it. Its grounds, its systems, its physical infrastructure, these are Willie's domain. And the show treats this contribution as essentially invisible because the institutional logic of Springfield Elementary, like the institutional logic of most institutions, values the administrators over the maintainers. Willie knows this. He has been living with it for his entire depicted career, and his response has been to develop a fierce, occasionally violent, genuinely Scottish pride in his own competence that functions as the only armor available against the specific humiliation of being essential and invisible. Apu Nahasapi Mapatilan ran the Quick E-Mart for the show's entire run until relatively recently, and his character arc contains its own dark dimensions. The Quick E-Mart is, within Springfield's economic ecosystem, the institution that provides the town with its most basic commercial needs. It is open all hours. It supplies the specific goods, the donuts, the squishies, the lottery tickets, the cigarettes that Springfield's residents depend on at all hours for reasons that are themselves telling. A population that needs convenience food at all hours of the day and night is a population that is not cooking at home, is not planning ahead, is not operating with the kind of domestic organization that comfortable middle-class life is supposed to produce. The Quick E-Mart is both the symptom and the enabler of a specific kind of poverty, not necessarily financial poverty. Though Springfield is a working-class town with working-class financial pressures, but the poverty of time and energy and cognitive bandwidth that leaves people reaching for convenience rather than sustenance. Apu sells this poverty back to people in the form of overpriced processed food, and he does it with a customer service smile that the show has always depicted as masking something considerably more complicated underneath. Mo Zislak and his tavern occupy perhaps the most philosophically complex position of any secondary location in the show. Mo's tavern is where Homer drinks, but it is also where the men of Springfield go to avoid being somewhere else. The tavern's regulars are not, for the most part, people with good reasons to be drinking. They are people with good reasons to not be home, which is different. Barney Gumbel's alcoholism is the most extreme version of this, but the dynamic applies across Moe's regular clientele. These are people for whom the tavern functions as a refuge from lives that have not worked out as expected, in a town where the reasons for that failure are structural and invisible. Moe himself is one of the show's saddest portraits. Not in the operatic way that Ned Flanders is sad, not in the complicated way that Homer is sad, but in a quieter and more specific way. Moe has been alone for decades. He has tried, across many episodes, to find connection and been defeated each time by a combination of his own limitations and the specific cruelty of the universe that the show reserves for him. He is not sympathetic in the easy way. He has done things that make sympathy difficult. But he is lonely in a way that the show depicts with more honesty than it typically gets credit for. And his loneliness is the loneliness of a person who has been in Springfield for so long that the options available to him have narrowed to the point where the tavern and its regulars are the most intimate community he has access to. Krusty the Clown is perhaps the most explicitly tragic secondary character, because the show has told his backstory in enough detail to make the tragedy legible. Krusty's father did not approve of his son's choice to become a clown. The specific, sustained, withering disapproval of a parent who wanted something different for their child is the wound that runs through everything Krusty does. His corruption, his addiction, his willingness to monetize his persona in ways that damage the children who love him, his inability to maintain any relationship for longer than it takes for the other person to see who he actually is, all of this traces back to the same source. A rabbi who wanted a rabbi son and got a clown instead, and never forgave the clown for not being what he was supposed to be. The show has, in its most ambitious moments, used Krusty to say something true about the relationship between parental expectation and the damage it does when those expectations cannot be met. Krusty cannot stop performing because performing is the only thing that interrupts the voice in his head that knows his father was right about him, that knows, at the deepest level, that the clown is not enough. He has built an empire on something he believes his father would have found shameful, and the empire means nothing to him because the person whose approval would have made it mean something is dead and was never going to give it anyway. Springfield is full of people like this. Full of people whose lives have been shaped by absences and failures and the wrong choices made for understandable reasons. Full of people who are doing their best in a town that has specific and powerful reasons to want them doing less than their best. The secondary characters are not comedy props. They are the town's depth. They are the evidence that whatever is happening in Springfield, whether it is the radiation or the institutional corruption or the collective denial or the coma dream, it is happening to everyone, not just the Simpsons family. Every person, in every background, in every crowd shot, in every Quickie Mart line, and every church pew, and every tavern bar stool, they all live in Springfield. They are all being shaped by Springfield. And they are all, in their different ways, managing number, the Simpsons, and the question of hope. We have spent a long time in the dark. We have examined the power plant, and the contamination, and the coma, and the institutional corruption, and the collective amnesia, and the immortal billionaire, and the family that cannot age because aging would mean ending. We have looked at the saddest character in the show, and the most dangerous one, and the most tragic one. We have traced the threads that connect every theory back to the same structural reality. It is worth ending somewhere different. Not with a denial of the darkness. The darkness is real. The evidence for it is real. The show put it there deliberately and has been maintaining it for 36 years. But with the acknowledgement that the darkness is not the whole picture. There is something in The Simpsons that survives everything the theories reveal about it. Something that is present in the best episodes and in the worst ones and in every ordinary episode in between. Something that makes 36 years of investment in this family feel, on balance, like time well spent rather than time lost. It is the love. The specific, unconditional, unreasonable, completely unjustifiable love that this family has for each other. Homer loves his family in a way that is not diminished by his limitations. His incompetence is real. His failures are real. The damage he causes, to himself and to the people around him, is real. But his love is also real, and the show has never, across 36 years, given you a reason to doubt it. Homer loves Marge the way a person loves something they know they do not deserve. He loves his children the way a person loves something they know they might break. He loves his family imperfectly and completely and without reservation. And this love is the thing that the coma theory says he is dreaming about, and the thing that the radiation theory says is still intact, despite everything the contamination has done to his brain, and the thing that every theory acknowledges because every theory has to account for why Homer, who is objectively very bad at almost everything, keeps trying. Love in The Simpsons is not a resolution. It does not fix the things that are broken. It does not address the power plant or the contamination or the political corruption or the institutional amnesia. It does not protect Ned Flanders from losing his wife or free Homer from the arrangement that keeps him at Burns's plant or give Lisa the world that deserves her intelligence. Love in The Simpsons is not powerful in those ways. But it is powerful in the way that it actually is powerful in real life. It is the reason people stay when staying is hard. It is the reason people try again when trying again seems pointless. It is the reason that, despite everything, despite the radiation and the coma and the shooting and the immortal billionaire and the collective amnesia, the family is still on the couch at the end of every episode. The loop that the floating timeline creates is a prison in the theoretical sense, but in the lived experience of watching the show, it is also a kind of guarantee. A weekly promise that the family will make it through whatever this episode has thrown at them. That the couch will be there, that the lights will be on, that Homer will somehow stumble home, and Marge will somehow have patience left, and Bart will somehow have gotten away with it, and Lisa will somehow have found a reason to hope, and Maggie will somehow have been more capable than anyone knew. The show keeps this promise. Week after week, decade after decade. The family makes it through, the episode ends, and they will be there again next week. This is the answer to the question we have been circling all night. Why do we keep watching? Why do we invest year after year in a show that reveals itself, under scrutiny, to be about contamination and corruption and institutional violence and the managed impairment of an entire population? Because underneath all of that is a family. An imperfect, impossible, entirely specific family that chooses each other every week, that is still choosing each other after 36 years. That will keep choosing each other for as long as the loop keeps running. The darkness is real. The love is also real. And Springfield, for all its cracked towers and its three-eyed fish and its dreaming man and its immortal billionaire, is still the place where Homer Simpson comes home at the end of the day. That is worth something. That might be worth everything. Number, what the show has always known, a final reading. There is a peculiar thing that happens when you spend a long time thinking about a piece of art that has been around for decades. You start to see it differently than you saw it when you first encountered it. Not because the work has changed, it has not. The episodes are the same episodes they have always been, but because you have changed, and because the accumulated weight of return visits and careful attention has built up something in you that was not there the first time you watched the credits roll over the Simpsons family sitting on their couch. The Simpsons is a show that rewards this kind of accumulated attention in ways that most long-running television series do not. Most series of this length eventually become diluted versions of what they were. The original creative vision gets stretched thin across hundreds of episodes until it is barely visible in any individual episode, present only in the accumulated memory of what the show used to be. The Simpsons has not entirely avoided this fate. The debate over the show's peak years is real, and the evidence for it is in the episodes themselves, but it has done something that very few long-running series manage. It has left enough structural material in the work itself that the work keeps rewarding close reading. The theories exist because the show deposited the evidence for them across decades of episodes. The radiation theory works because the show kept returning to the power plant, kept showing you the contamination, kept depicting its effects without naming them. The coma theory works because the show left the episode intact, with the 5% brain damage detail and the tonal shift intact and the God prophecy intact, and never closed the question it opened. The Burns immortality theory works because the show kept returning to Burns's medical situation, kept depicting his treatments, kept showing you a man who should have died many times and did not, and leaving the question open. The show knew what it was doing. Maybe not at the level of a deliberate, planned conspiracy to embed decades of layered meaning into an animated comedy for Fox, but at the level of a writing staff that understood these characters and this world more deeply than any individual episode required, and that kept depositing that understanding into the work, and that left the deposits in place rather than resolving them. Every theory in this video is made of things the show actually put on screen. Not speculation, not projection, not the kind of fan reading that requires ignoring inconvenient evidence. The three-eyed fish is in the show. The coma episode and the 5% detail is in the show. The empty holster is in the show. Burns's glowing treatment is in the show. The Tamzarian vote is in the show. Maggie's intelligence tests are in the show. Mona's story and the bioweapons lab are in the show. The geographic contradictions are in the show. The floating timeline is the show. The show put all of this there, and what we have done in this video is the thing that the show, at its best, wants you to do with it. We have looked at it carefully. We have taken it seriously. We have refused to accept the surface reading as the only reading. We have been the Lisa Simpsons of the audience, the ones who looked at the three-eyed fish and asked the question that the rest of the town would not ask. Why is this happening? What does it mean? Who built this? And what were they thinking? And what does it cost the people who live inside it? Springfield has always known the answers to these questions. It has just been unable to say them directly, for reasons we have spent this entire video understanding. The population is too impaired. The social contract prohibits it. The person who knows the most has the most to lose from saying it. The dreamer cannot question his own dream. So the show says them sideways, through a three-eyed fish and a glowing billionaire, and a coma episode with a strange detail about brain damage, and a baby who checks her surroundings before miming a gunshot, and an episode that makes truth illegal, and a town that sits at the intersection of every American geography at once. It says them, through accumulation and implication, and the specific texture of 36 years of returning to the same family in the same town and finding, each time, that the darkness is still there, still growing, still waiting for someone to look at it directly. We looked at it directly tonight. Whether it changed how you watch the show from here, whether the next time the couch gag plays and the opening credits roll you see the power plant differently, or feel something different when Homer stumbles home and Marge is already there, waiting with that patience that is not what it appears to be, that is up to you. But the evidence is in the episodes. It has always been in the episodes. And the invitation to look at it closely has always been there too, in the form of a cartoon family that is too specific, too detailed, too internally consistent to be only what it appears to be. Springfield is waiting. The show is still running. The loop is still floating. And somewhere in a hospital in Springfield, a man is dreaming about his family. They are on the couch. The lights are on. The television is playing. And nobody is going anywhere. Not yet. Number appendix. The details that never got resolved. The show has dozens of small, unexplained details that are never given the attention they deserve. These are not major mysteries like the shooting or the coma. They are the details that you notice once and then notice again, and then start to wonder whether you are supposed to be noticing them at all. The skeletons in the basement of the nuclear plant are the most obvious. We mentioned them in the first section. They deserve more consideration here. A working nuclear facility has human skeletons in its basement. Not historical remains, not something that predates the facility's construction. Skeletons in the basement of a place that has been operational for decades and has had regular, if entirely inadequate, safety inspections. Somebody found the skeletons during the inspection that revealed the 342 violations. The inspection report presumably includes this detail. The inspector did not pursue it. The report did not trigger any law enforcement response. The skeletons are simply in the basement, and Springfield noted them and moved on. The question of who those people were is unanswered and, within the show's universe, unanswerable. They could be early workers who died in unreported accidents during the plant's construction or early operation. They could be people who came too close to questions they should not have been asking. They could be the casualties of the specific kind of industrial secrecy that Burns has always maintained around his facility. The show does not say. It shows you the bones and moves on, and the movement is itself telling. In a town that has agreed not to know certain things, the bones in the basement are just another thing not to know. The luminescent rats are similarly unresolved. The show depicted them once, as part of the violations revealed during the inspection. Rats that glow in the dark because they have absorbed enough radiation from the facility's environment to be bioluminescent. These are not imaginary creatures. Bioluminescence in animals is real. It is produced by chemical processes. It does not happen in mammalian species under normal conditions. For a rat to glow, something has been done to its biology that is not supposed to happen. The rats live in the facility's walls, in the conduits, in the spaces that regular inspections do not reach. They have been absorbing radiation from a proximity most Springfield residents never experience. And they glow. The rats are not a background detail. They are evidence, living, glowing evidence, that the radiation inside the plant is intense enough to visibly alter the biology of mammals living within its walls. And if it does that to rats in the walls, what does the less intense but far more prolonged exposure do to people living in the town? The three-eyed fish is downstream. The rats are inside. The connection between the two should be obvious to anyone thinking clearly about the situation. The relationship between Kent Brockman and Springfield's actual news environment is another detail that accumulates across the run into something more significant than any individual episode suggests. Brockman is Springfield's most prominent news anchor. He is also, consistently, a figure of notable journalistic cowardice and expedience. He reports what will not get him in trouble. He frames stories in ways that do not threaten powerful interests. He abandoned his principles on air during the space shuttle episode when he believed an alien invasion was beginning, announcing his fealty to the new insect overlords with startling speed. But Brockman's cowardice is not his most interesting quality. His most interesting quality is his awareness. Brockman knows things. He is in a position to know things, as Springfield's primary journalist, that the general public does not. He has reported on the three-eyed fish. He has reported on Burns's various schemes. He has been present at many of the events that the show uses to establish Springfield's institutional dysfunction. And he has, in each case, reported these things in ways that minimize their implications and prevent them from accumulating into a coherent narrative that might demand action. This is not incompetence. A journalist who only reports things in ways that minimize their implications is not failing to understand those implications. He is choosing not to communicate them. Brockman understands exactly what the three-eyed fish means, and exactly what the power plant is doing, and exactly what Burns's influence over Springfield's institutions amounts to. He understands it because he covers it. And he has made a professional decision, sustained across decades of Springfield news coverage, that this is not the kind of thing he is going to be the journalist who says out loud on television. Whether this represents a private arrangement with Burns, the rational calculation of a man who knows which side his bread is buttered on, or something more complicated, perhaps a genuine belief that the stability of Springfield is worth the price of the things he does not report the show, does not entirely clarify. It simply shows you a journalist in possession of the relevant facts, making consistent choices about which facts become news and which ones stay in his notes. Brockman is one of the clearest windows into the way Springfield's information environment is managed, not through censorship in any dramatic, explicit sense. Through the ordinary, quotidian, professional calculation of what to emphasize and what to let recede. Springfield's population does not know the full truth about its situation, not because the information is unavailable. It is because the people whose job it is to present information to the public have decided, for various reasons and through various mechanisms, not to present this particular information in ways that would make its implications clear. This is not unique to Springfield. This is how information management works in real communities and real media environments. The dramatic version of it, the secret payment, the threat, the explicit instruction to suppress the story is rare. The ordinary version, the decision that this story is too complicated or too damaging to institutional relationships to pursue fully, is common. Brockman is doing the ordinary version, and Springfield's ignorance of its own situation is, in part, his product. The Quick E-Mart's persistent operational model is another detail that accumulates into something worth noticing. The Quick E-Mart is open 24 hours a day. It serves a community with sufficient demand for late-night convenience food and lottery tickets and cigarettes to justify being open at 3 in the morning every night of the week. This is not the commercial pattern of a healthy community. Communities with adequate economic stability, adequate housing, adequate time and resources for domestic food preparation do not generate this kind of demand for convenience retail at all hours. The Quickie Mart's business model is supported by the specific deficits of Springfield, the long working hours, the limited disposable income that makes large grocery purchases difficult, the cognitive and physical exhaustion of a population that is working harder than it should have to and thinking less clearly than it should be able to. The store is not the cause of these deficits. It is, in the most neutral sense, just responding to market demand. But the market demand it is responding to is itself a symptom of what Springfield is. And Apu, who has been serving that demand for decades, is in some ways the most intimate witness to the daily texture of Springfield's dysfunction. He sees his customers at their worst hours, in their worst moments, making purchases that reflect their worst choices and their most strained circumstances. He sees Springfield at 3 in the morning when nobody is performing normality for anyone. What he makes of what he sees, the show has given him moments of genuine philosophical depth amid the comedy, is another of Springfield's unresolved questions. Apu is a person of considerable intelligence who has chosen, through a combination of circumstance and commitment, to spend his working life at the center of Springfield's convenience economy. Whether this represents resignation, strategic calculation, or something else entirely, the show has never fully resolved. But the position he occupies gives him a perspective on Springfield that no other character shares, and the show has occasionally, briefly, let that perspective show through. These details, the skeletons, the glowing rats, Brockman's choices, the Quickie Mart's economics, and the dozens of similar small accumulations that a careful viewer notices across the run are not accidents. The show does not produce details by accident. Every choice in a script was chosen over other possible choices. Every detail that made it into an episode was there because someone decided it should be there. The skeletons were put in that basement by a writer who decided that the moment needed that specific detail, that extra measure of darkness, that one thing too many that makes the inspection scene more than a comedy set piece. The glowing rats were placed in that corridor for the same reason. These are deliberate signals, deposited into the work by people who knew what they were doing and trusted that some portion of their audience would eventually pick them up. We are that portion. We have been picking them up all night, and what we have found, in the accumulation of all of it, the major theories and the minor details and the characters and the institutions and the geography and the timeline, is a portrait of a place that is more honest about the world. It reflects than any of the straightforward realist shows that The Simpsons was supposedly imitating back in 1989. Springfield is not real, but the things Springfield is made of are real. The power disparities are real. The institutional corruption is real. The way communities manage inconvenient truths is real. The damage that early loss does to a person across an entire lifetime is real. The intelligence that hides behind apparent simplicity to protect itself is real. The love that survives everything despite everything is real. The Simpsons put all of this real stuff into an animated cartoon about a yellow family in an impossible town on an unfindable street. And then it ran for 36 years while the audience, who were looking at their own world refracted through Springfield's colors, grew up around it. We are all Springfieldians now. We have been for a long time. The question is whether we are going to keep looking at the three-eyed fish and saying, well, that's just how things are around here, or whether we are going to be the ones who ask why. Good night,